Stone by stone, the past whispers a challenge to everything we think we know. Long before modern machines, before blueprints and algorithms, ancient societies raised structures that still defy explanation. Precision carved into mountains, energy harnessed without wires, knowledge etched into monuments that outlived empires. Were these civilizations simply skilled? Or were they operating with technologies we've yet to rediscover? What if progress is not a straight line, but a forgotten cycle? Today, we step beyond assumption and into evidence, examining the structures, the methods, and the questions history left behind. Let's take a closer look. On the edge of the Judean desert, where limestone hills fade into open wilderness, the ruins of Tel Arad rise quietly from the earth. From a distance, the site appears almost modest. Low stone walls, scattered foundations, a plateau shaped by wind and time. Yet this silence is deceptive. Beneath it lies one of the most intriguing fortified settlements of the southern Levant, a place that has unsettled historians, archaeologists, and biblical scholars alike. Tel Arad was first settled in the early Bronze Age, around the 3rd millennium BCE, long before the rise of Israelite kingdoms. Archaeological layers reveal a planned Canaanite city with streets, drainage systems, and massive defensive walls, evidence of advanced urban organization at a surprisingly early date. After its abandonment, the site was later reused in the Iron Age, transformed into a fortress guarding key trade routes between the Negev, the Dead Sea, and the Mediterranean coast. It is this later phase that continues to provoke careful scrutiny. At the heart of the Iron Age fortress stands a structure unlike any other found in the region, a small, meticulously built temple. Its layout mirrors descriptions of the first temple in Jerusalem, an outer courtyard, a main hall, and a raised inner sanctum. 2 stone altars stood at its entrance, and within the innermost room, archaeologists discovered standing stones, or massaboth, possibly representing deities or sacred symbols. The resemblance is striking and deeply puzzling. According to mainstream scholarship, Tel Arad was a Judahite fortress operating between the 9th and early 6th centuries BCE. Ostraka, ink inscriptions on pottery shards, mention supplies, military orders, and names known from the Hebrew Bible. These texts ground the site firmly in historical reality. Yet the presence of a functioning temple outside Jerusalem complicates a long-held assumption that worship of Yahweh was centralized exclusively in the capital. Why would a secondary temple exist, complete with ritual altars and sacred space, if centralization was already enforced? One explanation suggests that religious reforms described in biblical texts, particularly those attributed to King Hezekiah or King Josiah, were not immediate or absolute. Tel Arad's temple, some argue, represents an older religious practice that persisted on the fringes of official doctrine. But there are details that resist easy categorization. Chemical analysis of residue found on the altars revealed traces of frankincense and, unexpectedly, cannabis mixed with animal dung, apparently used to enhance ritual smoke. This discovery opens a quieter, more unsettling line of inquiry. Were altered states of consciousness part of formal worship? And if so, what experiences were priests seeking within the sanctuary walls? More speculative interpretations go further, suggesting Tel Arad reflects a transitional moment in belief systems, a time when local traditions, regional politics, and emerging monotheism overlapped in ways later generations tried to simplify or erase. Some fringe theorists even question whether the site preserves traces of an older, now lost religious order, one that operated alongside or beneath the biblical narrative rather than within it. None of these ideas can be proven conclusively, and none need to be dismissed outright. What remains certain is that Tel Arad does not fit neatly into a single story. Its stones speak of administration and defense, but also of ritual precision and symbolic intent. The careful burial of the temple's altars before the fortress was abandoned suggests reverence rather than destruction, as if the site was intentionally closed, not defiled. Today, Tel Arad sits exposed to the same sun and wind that shaped it thousands of years ago. Excavated, catalogued, and studied, it still resists final interpretation. Was it a peripheral outpost following outdated customs, or a glimpse into a version of history later edited for clarity and control? And if a temple like this could exist here, quietly and officially, what other chapters of the ancient world remain hidden just beyond the edges of accepted history? From the sun-bleached stones of Tel Arad, where ritual and authority quietly overlapped, the trail of unanswered architecture leads west, across the Mediterranean, into the mountainous heart of Corsica. Here, surrounded by dense maquis scrub and granite ridges shaped by wind and time, another ancient structure waits in near silence. Castellu di Cucuruzzu does not rise dramatically on the horizon. It reveals itself slowly, almost reluctantly, as if meant to be discovered rather than seen. Perched above the Taravo Valley, Cucuruzzu is a fortified settlement built almost entirely of massive granite blocks, carefully stacked without mortar. The stones are rough yet deliberate, fitted together with a precision that suggests both experience and intention. Olive trees and cork oaks press close against the walls, blurring the line between ruin and landscape. From within the enclosure, the view stretches outward, toward distant hills, narrow passes, and ancient routes once traveled on foot. This was not an accidental location. Archaeological evidence places Cucuruzzu primarily in the Late Bronze Age, roughly between 1500 and 800 BCE, associated with the Taurian culture of Corsica. This culture is known for its megalithic towers, fortified villages, and standing stones, structures that appear defensive but also symbolic. Cucuruzzu, however, is distinct. Its walls curve organically with the terrain. Its internal layout suggests zones of control, movement, and possibly ritual separation. There are no grand palaces, no inscriptions to guide interpretation, only stone, space, and placement. Mainstream explanations describe Cucuruzzu as a hilltop fortress, a stronghold built to protect a community during a time of regional instability. From this vantage point, inhabitants could monitor movement through the valley and retreat behind thick stone walls when threatened. The design supports this view. Narrow entrances, elevated positions, and layered enclosures all suggest defense. Yet, defense alone does not fully explain the effort invested here. The scale of construction raises quiet questions. Transporting and positioning granite blocks of this size would have required coordination, planning, and a shared understanding of purpose. This was not a temporary refuge. It was meant to endure. Why, then, does the site lack clear evidence of long-term domestic life? Hearths are sparse. Artifacts are limited. It feels prepared, but not fully occupied. Some researchers propose that Cucuruzzu served multiple roles over time: a fortified refuge during conflict, a seasonal gathering place, perhaps even a center of authority for surrounding settlements. Others suggest a ceremonial function layered onto its defensive design. Certain alignments within the structure appear intentional, opening toward specific points on the horizon. Whether these were symbolic, practical, or coincidental remains unresolved. As with many megalithic sites, speculation begins where records end. Fringe theories cautiously note similarities between Corsican stonework and contemporaneous structures across the western Mediterranean, Sardinia's Nuragic, mainland Europe's hill forts, even distant Atlantic megaliths. Were these cultures connected by shared knowledge passed along sea routes now lost to time? Or are we seeing parallel solutions emerging independently in response to similar challenges? There is also the question of absence. Unlike later fortified sites, Cucuruzzu shows no clear signs of violent destruction. The walls were not breached. The stones were not toppled in haste. Instead, the site appears to have been gradually abandoned. No final catastrophe marks its end. It simply empties. Why would a community invest so heavily in such a place only to leave it behind? Standing within the walls today, sound seems muted. Wind moves through the grass. Insects trace invisible paths through the air. The stones retain heat long after sunset, as if holding memory. Archaeology can measure, date, and classify, but it cannot easily explain intent. Was Cucuruzzu built primarily to keep others out? Or to hold something in? A population, a tradition, a belief? Like Arad, Castellu di Cucuruzzu occupies an uncomfortable space between certainty and silence. It is well documented, carefully excavated, and yet fundamentally incomplete as a story. The stones remain, but the reasoning behind them has eroded. And as long as structures like this continue to defy simple explanation, one question lingers quietly in the Corsican hills. How many ancient purposes have we mistaken for ruins, simply because their meaning no longer speaks our language? From the granite stronghold of Cucuruzzu, where stone walls merged almost seamlessly with the Corsican hills, the journey returns east, back to the Levant, where water, soil, and power converge to shape some of the earliest urban landscapes. At the northern edge of modern-day Israel, beneath layers of vegetation and centuries of accumulated earth, the site of Tel Dan rests quietly beside the sources of the Jordan River. It is a place of abundant water and deep history, where one of the most formidable ancient defensive systems ever discovered still challenges conventional understanding. Approaching Tel Dan, the landscape feels unusually alive. Springs emerge from the ground with steady force, feeding dense greenery rarely seen elsewhere in the region. Tall trees cast long shadows over earthen mounds that rise gently rather than dramatically. Yet beneath these mounds lie massive stone ramparts, walls of extraordinary scale, built not of neatly cut blocks, but of compacted earth, stone, and brick, shaped into sweeping curves that encircle the ancient city. These ramparts date back to the Middle Bronze Age, roughly 1800 to 1550 BCE, a time when urban centers across the Levant were expanding rapidly. Archaeological excavations reveal that Tel Dan's defenses once stood several stories high and stretched hundreds of meters in length. The sheer volume of material involved is staggering. Tens of thousands of tons of earth and stone were moved, shaped, and reinforced, an undertaking that would have required centralized authority, organized labor, and long-term planning. Mainstream scholarship identifies Tel Dan as a major Canaanite city, strategically positioned to control trade routes between the interior Levant and the Mediterranean coast. The ramparts, according to this view, were built in response to increasing regional conflict. They were designed to protect the city from rival powers, raids, and shifting political alliances. In this context, the fortifications make sense, at least on paper. But standing at the base of these walls, their scale provokes a quieter unease. The ramparts are not merely tall, they are thick, layered, and engineered to absorb impact. Some sections slope outward at angles that reduce the effectiveness of battering rams and siege tactics not fully developed until centuries later. Why construct defenses seemingly prepared for threats that had yet to emerge? Equally striking is the precision of the design. Beneath the outer layers, excavations reveal carefully planned internal supports, stone revetments, compacted fill, and drainage systems that prevented collapse during heavy rains. This was not improvised construction. It reflects an understanding of structural stability that feels advanced for its time, achieved without written engineering manuals or modern surveying tools. The most famous feature associated with Tel Dan is the monumental mud brick gate complex, often cited as one of the oldest known arched gateways in the world. Its design distributes weight efficiently, allowing it to bear immense loads without failure. While arches would later become common in Roman architecture, their appearance here, centuries earlier, suggests knowledge that does not fit neatly into linear models of technological progress. These facts are well established. Yet questions linger at the edges of explanation. Why was such effort concentrated at Tel Dan when nearby cities of comparable size built far simpler defenses? What level of social organization was required to sustain a project of this magnitude, and what motivated it? Some researchers suggest Tel Dan may have held symbolic importance beyond its economic value. The city later became associated with religious activity, including a northern cultic center mentioned in biblical texts. Could the massive ramparts have served not only as protection, but as a statement, projecting permanence, authority, and perhaps even sacred significance? Walls, after all, can separate more than just enemies from inhabitants. They can define identity. More speculative interpretations explore the possibility that Tel Dan's builders inherited or adapted knowledge from earlier traditions now lost to history. Across the ancient Near East, large-scale earthworks appear suddenly in certain periods, then disappear just as quietly. Were these techniques widely known but poorly documented? Or were they guarded skills, passed selectively between elite groups? There is also the matter of continuity. The ramparts remained in use, maintained and modified over centuries, long after the original builders were gone. Later inhabitants relied on structures they may not have fully understood, reinforcing them rather than replacing them. This raises an unsettling thought. How often does civilization build upon foundations whose original logic has already faded? Despite decades of excavation, much of Tel Dan remains buried. The ramparts are only partially exposed, their full extent still concealed beneath soil and vegetation. Modern technology has allowed archaeologists to map sections using ground-penetrating methods, revealing shapes and layers that suggest even more complexity below the surface. Each new discovery answers one question while quietly multiplying others. Today, visitors walk along elevated paths, reading plaques that summarize centuries in a few paragraphs. The river flows steadily nearby, just as it did when the city was young. Birds nest where watchtowers once stood, and the ramparts remain, silent, massive, and oddly patient. Like Cucuruzzu's stone walls and Tel Arad's buried altars, the defenses of Tel Dan resist final interpretation. They are undeniably real, meticulously studied, and yet still incomplete as a story. Were they simply the product of fear and ambition, or do they reflect a deeper understanding of landscape, power, and time? One that modern frameworks struggle to articulate. As we move on from Tel Dan, one question stays behind with the stones. How much ancient knowledge lies hidden not because it was destroyed, but because it was never meant to be fully seen, only used, then quietly forgotten? From the massive, sun-warmed ramparts of Tel Dan, where water and stone converged to define both defense and identity, the journey of ancient structures takes us across continents once more, this time to the windswept hills of northwestern Europe. Here, on a rugged rise overlooking the verdant valleys of County Donegal, Ireland, sits the Grianan of Aileach, a fort that has commanded attention for millennia, both for its striking presence and the mysteries it quietly preserves. Unlike the sprawling earthworks of Tel Dan or the layered stones of Cucuruzzu, Grianan of Aileach presents a different, yet equally enigmatic form of ancient ambition. From a distance, the site appears deceptively simple. A circular ring of massive limestone blocks, perched atop a hill that seems almost carved into the sky. The walls, constructed with no mortar, rise impressively above the surrounding terrain, their shadows stretching across slopes dotted with heather and low shrubs. At sunrise, the fort appears to glow, an ethereal halo framing its silhouette against the shifting mists of the valley below. It is both isolated and commanding, a sentinel that dominates the landscape in every direction. Archaeological studies date the current stone structure to around the 6th or 7th century CE, though evidence suggests that the site was in use long before these walls were erected. Some scholars point to a tradition of ritual activity and settlement in the area dating back to the Iron Age, perhaps even earlier. The circular plan, a recurring motif in Celtic architecture, suggests a combination of defensive function and symbolic intent. But the simplicity of a circle belies the complexity of the questions that arise once one studies the fort in detail. The walls themselves are a marvel of dry stone construction. Each block, carefully chosen and positioned, contributes to a structure that has withstood centuries of Atlantic storms. There are entrances, deliberately narrow and oriented along specific lines, which some argue may align with solar or lunar events, hinting at astronomical knowledge encoded within the architecture. Was this circularity chosen solely for defense, or did it also carry symbolic, spiritual, or ritual significance? And if the latter, what beliefs or cosmologies were encoded in the placement of each stone? Historically, Grianan of Aileach is thought to have been the seat of the northern Euny, a ruling dynasty that dominated much of Northern Ireland. Medieval chronicles describe it as a royal fort, a center of authority, and a site of ceremonial importance. Yet beyond these textual references, the fort is frustratingly silent. Excavations have revealed evidence of domestic activity, hearths, post holes, and small artifacts. But the overall footprint is relatively minimal for a structure of such imposing scale. Why dedicate so much labor to building walls that dwarf the internal living space? What precisely required this level of investment? Some mainstream interpretations propose that the fort's imposing design was intended primarily to project power, to impress allies and intimidate rivals. This is consistent with known practices of Iron Age European polities, where architecture often served as both literal and symbolic fortification. However, other details resist easy categorization. The sheer size and regularity of the walls suggest a level of engineering knowledge that would have required planning, skilled labor, and a long-term vision. Did these builders possess techniques or knowledge now lost to us? Were these walls designed with a function beyond mere defense, perhaps linked to ritual or astronomical observation? Speculative theories, while not universally accepted, explore the fort's potential as a ceremonial center. Some suggest that its elevated position and circular layout may have created acoustically resonant spaces, amplifying sound for gatherings, chants, or ritual performance. Others have noted that the site aligns loosely with natural features in the surrounding landscape, hinting at a cosmological or territorial mapping that is difficult to verify but tantalizing to consider. Could the fort have been intended as a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds, a place where geography and belief converged? Adding to the mystery is the question of its endurance and reconstruction. The current stone walls date to the early medieval period, but oral tradition and historical records suggest that previous structures, likely made of wood or earth, stood on this site for centuries before. Each generation rebuilt and reinforced the fort, preserving the location's significance through successive eras. Why this continuity? Was the hill itself imbued with meaning that transcended individual dynasties or practical concerns? And if so, what made this particular rise so essential to successive peoples? Grianan of Aileach, like Teldon and Cucuruzzu, embodies a tension between the known and the unknowable. Archaeology can reveal its walls, its hearths, its carefully placed stones, but it cannot fully explain why generations of people invested so much effort in shaping this landscape. Were the walls primarily defensive, ceremonial, or symbolic? Perhaps they were all three, layered with purposes that shifted over time. Standing within the circular enclosure today, one is struck by the openness of the surrounding land. Wind sweeps across the hilltop, carrying the scent of grass and sea salt from the distant coast. Birds wheel overhead, and the horizon stretches uninterrupted in every direction. The fort is at once commanding and vulnerable, protective yet exposed. Its stones, carefully positioned, speak of skill and purpose, but they do not speak of intentions fully comprehensible to us. And so, the Grianan of Aileach invites reflection. Like the massive ramparts of Tel Dan or the fortified heights of Cucuruzzu, it reminds us that ancient architecture is rarely just architecture. It is a record of belief, power, labor, and perhaps knowledge now lost. How much did the builders understand of the forces around them? Structural, astronomical, social, and how much remains hidden, quietly encoded in the landscape itself? As we continue to explore these extraordinary sites across the globe, one truth remains constant. Each stone, each wall, each circle carries a question that time has not yet answered and may never fully reveal. From the windswept heights of Ireland's Grianan of Aileach, where stone circles and commanding views whisper of authority, ritual, and generations long past, our journey now turns southeast, crossing the Black Sea and the rugged Caucasus Mountains to the country of Georgia. Here, nestled atop rocky terraces overlooking the confluence of rivers and the rolling valleys below, lie the remains of Samshvilde, a site whose Cyclopean fortifications have endured millennia, quietly defying both time and explanation. Unlike the circular precision of Grianan or the massive earthworks of Tel Dan, Samshvilde presents a labyrinth of monumental stone, weathered yet unbowed, whose scale and construction inspire awe. Approaching the fortress, one is immediately struck by the sheer magnitude of the walls. Massive, roughly hewn limestone and basalt blocks interlock without mortar, forming barriers so imposing that early observers believed only giants could have moved them, a notion that later gave rise to the term Cyclopean. These walls twist and turn with the contours of the hill, creating terraces, towers, and enclosures that climb the natural slope, integrating the fortress seamlessly into the terrain. Sunlight glints off the stones at certain angles, while shadows pool in crevices, giving the impression of depth and complexity far greater than the eye first perceives. Archaeological evidence dates Samshvilde's earliest fortifications to at least the 2nd millennium BCE, though some scholars argue that the site may have been occupied even earlier as a ceremonial or strategic location. The scale of the Cyclopean walls suggests not just practical defense, but a highly organized society capable of mobilizing vast resources over extended periods. Tens of thousands of tons of stone were quarried, shaped, and transported, likely requiring coordinated labor, knowledge of leverage, and a sophisticated understanding of structural stability, all accomplished without the machinery modern engineers would assume necessary. Mainstream scholarship frames Samshvilde as a fortress city of strategic importance, guarding trade routes and river valleys that connected the South Caucasus with Anatolia and beyond. Its walls, terraces, and towers would have allowed defenders to monitor and control movement across the region, making the city both a military stronghold and an administrative center. Excavations have revealed remnants of domestic quarters, storage spaces, and defensive towers, suggesting the site was more than a temporary refuge. It was a functioning city with a social hierarchy organized around its fortifications. Yet, the fortifications themselves raise questions that conventional explanations cannot fully satisfy. Many of the Cyclopean blocks are enormous, irregularly shaped, and fitted together with remarkable precision. Some weigh several tons, yet they appear to have been arranged in patterns that resist purely utilitarian interpretation. Why spend such extraordinary effort shaping stones that, in functional terms, could have been stacked more quickly and easily? Could the layout hold symbolic meaning, encoded knowledge, ritual significance, or perhaps a form of territorial or spiritual expression lost to time? Beyond the engineering marvels, Samshvilde offers intriguing anomalies. Certain terraces and wall alignments correspond, some scholars note, with distant peaks or river bends, suggesting an awareness of the surrounding landscape that goes beyond defense. Was the fortress designed with an eye toward the heavens, mapping celestial patterns onto the earth below? While speculative, these observations provoke the question, to what extent were the builders seeking not merely to protect, but to inscribe meaning into stone itself? Cyclopean architecture is often associated with mystery because it challenges assumptions about the technological capabilities of ancient peoples. Similar constructions are found across the Mediterranean and Eurasia, from Mycenae to Sardinia, raising questions about whether these represent parallel innovation, shared knowledge, or something more profound. A recurring approach to monumental construction whose origins and transmission remain elusive. Could Samshvilde's builders have been part of a wider tradition of engineering knowledge, lost to time, that connected distant cultures through principles we are only beginning to glimpse? The site's later history only deepens the enigma. Samshvilde was occupied, abandoned, and reoccupied multiple times over the centuries. Medieval chronicles recount sieges, political upheaval, and religious transitions, yet the walls often survived intact, continuing to dominate the landscape long after the original builders had vanished. Their endurance suggests a robustness not solely born of necessity, but perhaps also of accumulated wisdom, a knowledge of how to build structures that can endure the harsh winters, seismic tremors, and human conflict characteristic of the Caucasus region. Even today, much of Samshvilde remains obscured by soil, vegetation, and centuries of erosion. Archaeological excavations have revealed only portions of the full fortification system, leaving vast terraces and hidden passages unexplored. Each layer uncovered seems to answer some questions while quietly multiplying others. Were the Cyclopean walls purely defensive, or were they also ritual, symbolic, or astronomical markers? How much technical expertise was required to quarry, move, and position these stones so precisely, long before written engineering manuals? Standing amidst the ruins, one feels the weight of history, both literal and metaphorical. The blocks are immense, the walls towering, yet the site feels strangely intimate, as though every stone has been placed deliberately, with purpose beyond mere function. The wind moves through the terraces, carrying the scent of earth and vegetation. From certain vantage points, the fortress seems to survey not only the valley below, but the past itself, as if inviting those who enter to contemplate the lives, intentions, and knowledge of those who raised it. Samshvilde, like Grianan of Aileach, Tel Dan, and Cucuruzzu, occupies a space between the fully understood and the mysterious. Archaeology can measure, date, and reconstruct, but it cannot fully explain the motivations behind such monumental effort. Were the walls constructed primarily to defend, or were they also statements of power, identity, and cosmology? And if so, what knowledge or beliefs guided the hands that shaped each stone? In the quiet of the Caucasus hills, the fortress speaks without words. Its Cyclopean walls, terraces, and towers endure as a testament to human ambition, ingenuity, and perhaps secrets now lost to time. As we move forward in our exploration of ancient structures that continue to confound, Samshvilde leaves a lingering question. How much of the ingenuity of the past remains hidden, inscribed in stone, waiting for us to decipher, but perhaps never fully revealing itself? From the towering Cyclopean walls of Samshvilde, where stone and landscape converge to create a fortress that has withstood centuries of weather, conflict, and human curiosity, our journey now returns to the Mediterranean, this time to the rugged, sun-scorched island of Sardinia. Here, scattered across hills and plains, lie structures that do not reach for the sky or dominate valleys, but descend quietly into the earth, the Nuragic sacred wells, or pozzi sacri. These subterranean constructions are deceptively simple at first glance, yet they resonate with a complexity and precision that continues to intrigue archaeologists and historians alike. The approach to a sacred well is subtle, almost intimate. A narrow stairway of precisely fitted stone descends into a circular chamber, often no wider than a small room, yet meticulously constructed with massive blocks that curve inward to form a near-perfect cone. At the base, a pool of water glimmers, fed by the steady seepage of underground springs. Light filters down through the narrow opening above, sometimes falling in a precise beam at certain times of the year, an alignment that seems far from coincidental. The air is cool, damp, and still, carrying a faint scent of mineral-rich water and centuries of human presence. Standing at the threshold, it is impossible not to feel that this is a place intentionally designed for contemplation, ritual, or perhaps communion with something unseen. These wells are generally attributed to the Nuragic civilization, which flourished in Sardinia between the 18th and 2nd centuries BCE. The Nuragic people are best known for their nurag, towering, truncated stone structures. But the sacred wells reveal another dimension of their ingenuity. Unlike their massive above-ground constructions, these subterranean chambers required delicate precision. Each block had to be positioned to bear the weight of earth above, to prevent collapse, and to channel water into a central basin without modern pumps or tools. The engineering is extraordinary. Some wells maintain a near-perfect circularity across walls that descend 10 meters or more, with stairs curving in elegant, consistent spirals. Mainstream interpretations describe the sacred wells as centers of ritual water worship. Water, abundant in some parts of Sardinia yet precious in others, would have held both practical and spiritual significance. Excavations at sites such as Santa Cristina and Fontana Coberta have uncovered offerings, ceramics, small figurines, and traces of plant and animal remains, suggesting ceremonies and communal gatherings. Scholars argue that the alignment of certain wells with solstices and equinoxes indicates a sophisticated understanding of astronomy, allowing rituals to coincide with solar events. These insights, though compelling, only hint at the full range of purposes these wells may have served. Yet there are aspects of the sacred wells that remain enigmatic. Some wells are isolated, far from other Nuragic settlements, positioned on ridges or near natural springs in locations that seem chosen for reasons beyond practicality. Others are clustered near Nuragic complexes, yet their orientation, shape, and scale vary widely, defying simple categorization. Why construct some wells with narrow, precise conical shafts, while others expand into wider, more communal chambers? What dictated these architectural choices? Beyond these practical and ritual considerations, some researchers have noted acoustical properties that suggest intentional design. Descending the steps into certain wells, a human voice resonates in a low, reverberating tone, as though the stone itself amplifies sound. Could this have been a deliberate feature, enhancing chants, prayers, or other ceremonies? If so, it points to a level of architectural sophistication that is difficult to quantify, particularly given the absence of written records from the Nuragic people. Speculative interpretations extend further. Some suggest that the wells functioned as liminal spaces, a bridge between the surface world and an underworld of spiritual or symbolic significance. The interplay of light, water, and stone may have been designed to evoke transformation or reflection. Others draw connections to similar water-centered sacred structures elsewhere in the Mediterranean, from Malta to Crete, hinting at shared or parallel traditions in ritual architecture. Were these wells a regional phenomenon reflecting universal ideas about water and divinity? Or do they conceal a form of knowledge unique to the Nuragic culture, now lost? The scale and precision of these constructions also raise practical questions. How did communities transport and shape massive limestone blocks with limited technology? How did they achieve such remarkable alignment without written engineering manuals or tools of measurement? The answers may lie partially in skill, partially in tradition, but the combination of precision, artistry, and spiritual intent continues to challenge modern assumptions about ancient technological and conceptual capabilities. Today, the sacred wells remain both inviting and elusive. Visitors climb narrow hillsides to peer into darkened shafts, descend careful stairways to feel the cool spray of subterranean water, and witness the way light interacts with the stone at dawn and dusk. Archaeological surveys and modern imaging techniques have revealed more about their structure, yet the motivations, beliefs, and knowledge systems that inspired their creation remain largely hidden. Like the Cyclopean walls of Samshvilde, the circular fortifications of Grianan of Aileach, and the massive ramparts of Tel Dan, the Nuragic sacred wells occupy a liminal space between the known and the mysterious. They are at once practical, spiritual, and symbolic, built for human use, yet seemingly designed to evoke wonder and reflection. Every carved stone, every carefully channeled drop of water suggests intentionality beyond survival alone, a dialogue with nature, the heavens, and perhaps the unseen world. And so, as we descend the steps of these ancient shafts and gaze into the still water at their base, we are reminded of a question that resonates across millennia. How much of human ingenuity and spiritual insight has been lost to time, encoded in stone and water, waiting silently for us to rediscover? The Nuragic sacred wells offer no definitive answers, only an invitation to wonder, and to acknowledge that some mysteries, profound and beautiful, may never be fully revealed. From the quiet, subterranean waters of Sardinia's Nuragic sacred wells, where stone, water, and ritual converge to create spaces both practical and profoundly symbolic, our exploration now turns northward, across the restless North Sea, to the windswept archipelago of Orkney and Shetland, and finally to the rugged, rocky landscapes of Scotland's Orkney Islands. Here, among rolling grasslands and exposed granite, sits a singular, enigmatic monument, the Dwarfie Stane, a rock-cut chamber tomb that has puzzled historians, archaeologists, and folklore enthusiasts for centuries. Unlike Nuragic wells, which descend into the earth in elegant spirals, the Dwarfie Stane rises as a solitary mass of stone, hollowed into a chamber both intimate and mysterious. From a distance, the Dwarfie Stane appears deceptively ordinary, a large block of Devonian sandstone, rounded and weathered by millennia of wind and rain. But as one approaches, the precision of human intervention becomes unmistakable. A narrow entrance leads into an interior chamber carved entirely from the living rock, forming a rectangular space roughly 3 meters long and just over 1 meter wide. The walls are smooth, the corners sharply defined, and the ceiling flat and consistent. The craftsmanship is remarkable. It is a tomb hollowed by human hands, yet so perfectly executed that one might almost mistake it for a single, naturally formed cavity. Archaeologists generally date the Dwarfie Stane to the Neolithic or Early Bronze Age, around 3000 to 2000 BCE, situating it within the broader context of megalithic and rock-cut tomb construction found across the British Isles. It is unique in Scotland. Most chambered tombs consist of megalithic stone slabs forming external chambers, rather than being carved from a single monolithic boulder. This distinction alone has inspired speculation about both the technological capabilities of its builders and the cultural influences that shaped their work. Mainstream interpretations describe the Dwarfie Stane as a funerary monument, a place for the interment of important individuals or groups, perhaps with a ritual dimension attached to death and the transition to the afterlife. Excavations, though limited, have revealed traces of human remains, charcoal, and fragments of pottery, suggesting ceremonial activity. Its location, isolated yet prominent within the landscape, hints at a deliberate selection, offering visibility across the surrounding terrain while simultaneously creating a sense of enclosure and seclusion within the chamber itself. Yet the tomb's construction raises questions that standard explanations struggle to address fully. Carving a chamber of this size and symmetry from solid sandstone would have required extraordinary effort, patience, and skill. The walls are smooth and the angles precise, yet no evidence remains of tools or methods used to achieve such refinement. How did a small Neolithic community manage to hollow this mass of rock with such accuracy? And why choose to carve into a single boulder, rather than constructing a more conventional chamber from assembled stones? The Dwarfie Stane's dimensions and proportions also appear deliberately human-scaled. The chamber is compact, almost claustrophobic, yet it allows enough space for ceremonial activity or placement of bodies. Some scholars speculate that this may reflect a symbolic intention. The tomb itself is a womb of stone, a transition between life and death, enclosing the deceased in a form of protective embrace. Others note that the orientation of the entrance aligns roughly with the rising sun on certain dates, suggesting a possible connection to solar cycles, seasonal rituals, or cosmological belief. Folklore has long surrounded the Dwarfie Stane, adding layers of mystery to an already enigmatic monument. Local legend holds that it was created by a dwarf or supernatural being, whose skill was unmatched by ordinary humans, a mythic explanation for what the eye perceives as impossible. Such tales, while anecdotal, hint at the impression the tomb has made over centuries. It is not merely a burial site, but a locus of awe, wonder, and narrative imagination. The human mind instinctively seeks explanations when confronted with evidence of mastery that seems beyond its grasp. Speculative theories extend into architectural and cultural considerations. Some researchers have suggested influences from Mediterranean or Atlantic rock-cut traditions, pointing to parallels in chambered tombs in Malta and Sardinia. Could the Dwarfie Stane represent a northern echo of wider megalithic trends, a synthesis of local ingenuity and distant inspiration? Others ponder whether the precision and smoothness of the chamber imply techniques or knowledge that were lost as communities migrated, adapted, or vanished. Despite centuries of observation and study, many questions remain. Why select a single massive block rather than multiple stones? Was the tomb a communal resting place or reserved for a single elite individual? What ceremonies took place within its walls, and how did its builders conceptualize the act of interment within carved stone rather than assembled slabs? Each detail suggests intentionality, yet the absence of contemporaneous records leaves interpretation largely to inference and imagination. Today, visitors to the Dwarfie Stane descend carefully into the chamber, brushing against the smooth sandstone walls and peering into its dimly lit interior. The air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of moss and stone. Light enters through the small doorway, illuminating features with subtle gradations that shift as the sun moves across the sky. In this quiet, it is easy to sense the presence of those who carved, entered, and revered this place thousands of years ago, and to feel the weight of a question that endures. How much of their knowledge, belief, and intent is encoded in the stone itself, hidden in ways that time has preserved but not explained? The Dwarfie Stane, like Sardinia's sacred wells, Georgia's Samshvilde, Ireland's Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Don's massive ramparts, occupies a liminal space between what is known and what remains mysterious. It embodies human skill, devotion, and imagination, yet it refuses to reveal all its secrets. Was it purely a tomb, or was it a ritual chamber, a symbolic statement, or a repository of knowledge lost to history? The answers remain elusive, leaving only the silent stone to bear witness, inviting us to wonder, and to acknowledge that some mysteries, profound and enduring, may never be fully unraveled. From the windswept stone of Scotland's Dwarfie Stane, where rock was hollowed with precision to create a chamber that has perplexed generations, our journey moves far across the oceans to the western Pacific, to the remote tropical islands of Palau. Here, in the lush, humid jungles and limestone plateaus of these archipelagos, stand the stone monoliths of Badrulchau, a prehistoric site that immediately arrests attention and invites reflection. Unlike the tombs of Orkney or the subterranean wells of Sardinia, Badrulchau is entirely above ground, an arrangement of enormous standing stones, some upright, some toppled, whose purpose and construction remain a subject of intrigue and speculation. Approaching the site, the first impression is of scale and deliberate placement. The stones rise from the earth in irregular yet seemingly intentional patterns, their surfaces rough and weathered, yet each massive enough to require extraordinary effort to move and erect. The tallest monoliths reach several meters into the air, their sheer bulk suggesting an advanced understanding of leverage, human coordination, and the manipulation of heavy materials. Dense vegetation surrounds them, vines and ferns creeping along their bases, softening the visual impact but not diminishing their silent authority. Sunlight pierces the canopy in shifting beams, illuminating one stone at a time, giving the impression that the site is alive, responding to the natural rhythms of the environment. Archaeological study places the site in the prehistoric era, though precise dating remains challenging. Some estimates suggest that the monoliths were erected around 1000 BCE or earlier, possibly as part of a complex ceremonial or territorial system. Unlike similar megalithic sites in Southeast Asia or the Pacific, Badrulchau is notable for the sheer size of its stones relative to the apparent population of the island at the time. How could small communities, without domesticated beasts of burden or sophisticated machinery, transport and position these stones with such precision? The effort involved points to a social organization and technical skill that hints at knowledge now largely lost. Mainstream explanations suggest that the monoliths were markers for communal, spiritual, or navigational purposes. They may have delineated sacred spaces, ceremonial grounds, or even cosmological alignments. Local tradition, still alive in oral histories, hints at connections between the stones and ancestral worship, with rituals possibly centered on fertility, harvests, or the marking of time. Excavations, however limited, have yet to reveal burials or artifacts of sufficient quantity to confirm any single hypothesis definitively. Their silence is part of the site's enduring mystery. Yet the physical arrangement of the stones suggests more than simple boundary markers. Some monoliths appear aligned along axes that coincide with sunrise or sunset at solstices, while others form lines that seem to reference nearby natural features such as hills, river valleys, or the ocean horizon. Was this alignment intentional, designed to track celestial cycles or seasonal shifts? If so, it implies a sophisticated understanding of astronomy embedded in the landscape, encoded in stone for generations to interpret and use. The construction methods themselves provoke further speculation. Many of the stones are partially carved, their bases shaped to sit firmly on the ground, while others bear grooves or indents suggesting that ropes or levers were used to maneuver them. No quarries of matching stone have been conclusively identified nearby, raising the question, how were these enormous blocks sourced, transported, and positioned with such apparent care? And why dedicate such monumental effort to stones that, for all their physical prominence, yield so little in the way of inscriptions or obvious narrative content? Some theorists propose that the Badrulchau stones may have served as a stage for communal memory or ritualized performance. The spaces between the stones could have framed movement, gatherings, or ceremonies, creating an intentional choreography of human interaction with the monoliths. Others speculate that the stones themselves acted as markers of cosmological knowledge, a three-dimensional calendar, a physical encoding of celestial and seasonal cycles. Whether these interpretations hold, the alignment, scale, and positioning of the stones undeniably suggest intentionality beyond mere decoration or practical utility. The monolith's very survival speaks to both natural resilience and human foresight. Centuries of tropical storms, shifting soils, and vegetation growth have not displaced the stones from their original locations. This durability implies careful planning, not only in erection but in siting, ensuring stability over generations. Could this reflect an understanding of geological forces, of soil weight, and of long-term environmental changes? And if so, does it hint at knowledge of engineering principles that has been forgotten, perhaps lost as social or ritual structures changed? Visiting Badrulchau today, one feels a profound sense of scale and silence. Birds flit among the stones, insects hum in the undergrowth, and the humid air carries the scent of moss and limestone. The monoliths seem to engage the observer in a dialogue across time, silent, immovable, yet unmistakably intentional. One cannot help but wonder at the minds that imagined, quarried, transported, and arranged these stones so long ago. What beliefs, knowledge, or purposes inspired them, and how much of it remains beyond our comprehension? Badrulchau, like the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan, occupies a liminal space between human skill and enduring mystery. It is a monument to effort, precision, and perhaps belief, but its full meaning continues to elude us. Was it a ritual center, a calendar, a symbolic statement of power, or something else entirely? And if these stones were designed to communicate knowledge or align with natural cycles, how much of that knowledge has been irretrievably lost? As the sunlight shifts across the moss-covered surfaces, casting long shadows among the towering blocks, one is left with the quiet, persistent impression that Badrulchau was designed to inspire reflection and contemplation, even across millennia. And in that silence, it asks the same question that echoes through all the extraordinary structures we have visited so far. How much of humanity's ancient ingenuity, encoded in stone and space, remains hidden, waiting for us to decipher, yet perhaps never fully revealing its secrets? From the standing stones of Badrulchau in Palau, where massive monoliths rise silently from tropical forest floors, testaments to skill, ritual, and perhaps knowledge now lost, our journey returns to Europe, this time to the rolling hills of central France. Here, at the summit of Mont Beuvray, lie the remnants of Bibracte, the ancient Gallic oppidum, famed not only for its role in history, but for its extraordinary stone ramparts known as Murus Gallicus. Unlike Palau's open-air megaliths, Bibracte's fortifications are engineered expressions of both defense and ingenuity, blending wood, stone, and earth in a construction that has fascinated archaeologists for centuries. The first view of the ramparts is arresting. From the crest of the hill, terraces of massive stone blocks stretch across the slopes, interwoven with layers of timber that have long since decayed. The walls rise in formidable lines, punctuated by bastions and gateways, their scale and complexity immediately suggesting a society capable of remarkable coordination and technical knowledge. Even in ruins, the Murus Gallicus conveys an unmistakable sense of power and precision. It is as if the stones themselves bear witness to strategies and hierarchies long forgotten. Archaeological evidence dates the Murus Gallicus at Bibracte to the late Iron Age, roughly the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, coinciding with the height of Gallic tribal power and the tumultuous period of Roman expansion. The ramparts are notable not only for their size but for their distinctive construction technique. Massive horizontal timbers, interlaced with stone, create a lattice of strength and flexibility, a design resilient against both battering and fire. The wall's interior cores, densely packed with earth and rubble, absorb impact and reinforce stability, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of structural engineering that seems advanced even by modern standards. Mainstream scholarship frames the Murus Gallicus primarily as defensive architecture, a response to the constant threat of rival tribes and Roman incursions. Excavations have revealed entrances carefully designed to funnel attackers, bastions positioned to optimize visibility, and multiple concentric walls allowing successive layers of defense. Bibracte was not simply a settlement. It was a fortress city, a center of political and economic power, designed to withstand prolonged sieges and to project dominance across the surrounding landscape. Yet, as with many ancient constructions, the ramparts provoke questions that transcend simple practicality. The labor required to quarry stone, fell trees, transport timbers, and construct walls of such precision implies not only organization, but also specialized knowledge and long-term planning. How were these materials moved and assembled with such accuracy without modern machinery? How did the Gallic tribes achieve this combination of flexibility and rigidity, understanding that the interplay of wood and stone would produce walls resistant to both fire and structural collapse? Some researchers have noted that the ramparts, particularly in their layout along the hill's contours, suggest more than defensive intent. Certain sections appear to align with the cardinal directions or prominent points in the landscape, hinting at possible astronomical observation, ritual significance, or symbolic messaging. Could the Murus Gallicus have served dual purposes, protecting inhabitants while encoding cultural knowledge into the very shape of the fortification? And if so, what messages or traditions might have been inscribed in the stone and timber lattice for those who understood its language? The Murus Gallicus also raises questions about social organization. Constructing such fortifications would have required sustained cooperation, skilled labor, and centralized oversight. Yet Gallic society is often characterized as tribal and decentralized. How was such a monumental project conceived, financed, and executed within this context? Was there a specialized class of builders or engineers, or did communal effort and inherited knowledge account for the construction? And what other sites, perhaps now lost to time, might have employed similar techniques? Beyond structural and social considerations, some speculative theories have emerged. Certain researchers point to similarities between Murus Gallicus ramparts and other Iron Age fortifications in Europe, suggesting a transfer of knowledge across regions or a shared architectural tradition. Others ponder whether the fortifications at Bibracte, with their combination of timber and stone, reflect an intuitive understanding of seismic forces or natural erosion, principles not formally documented until millennia later. Were the builders consciously anticipating environmental pressures, or did this expertise arise through accumulated experience, trial, and observation? Visiting Bibracte today, the remnants of the ramparts stretch across the hillsides, partially reconstructed in places, partially eroded into terraces of earth and scattered stone. The wind moves through the gaps, carrying the scent of grass and moss, while distant valleys unfold below in a patchwork of fields and forests. Standing at the base of a surviving wall, one is struck by both the ingenuity of its design and the silence of the centuries. The ramparts speak of strategy, labor, and authority, but their full story, the decisions behind every timber, stone, and angle, remains elusive. Like the stone monoliths of Palau, the rock-cut Dwarfie Stane, Sardinia's sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan's massive ramparts, the Murus Gallicus of Bibracte occupies a space between mastery and mystery. It is undeniably human-made, meticulously planned, and yet partially inscrutable. Were these fortifications solely defensive, or did they also serve as cultural, ritual, or symbolic statements? Did they encode knowledge about the landscape, celestial patterns, or social hierarchy that has been lost over time? As the sun casts long shadows across the terraces and fallen stones, it is impossible not to sense that the builders of Bibracte were not merely constructing walls, they were shaping a vision of permanence, of presence, and perhaps of memory itself. And in that quiet, enduring presence, one is left with the persistent question that threads through all the extraordinary sites we have explored. How much of ancient human ingenuity, embedded in stone and timber, remains hidden from us, waiting silently for discovery, or understanding that may never fully come? From the rolling hills and meticulously engineered ramparts of Bibracte, where timber and stone intertwine in a testament to human ingenuity, our journey now stretches far eastward, across continents, to the vast plains and loess plateaus of northern China. Here lies Shimao, the largest known stone-walled city of the Neolithic world, nestled in the remote reaches of Shanxi province. Unlike the Murus Gallicus, where wood and stone were interlaced to form formidable defensive walls, Shimao presents an architectural vision of scale and precision that rivals many later civilizations, and yet it predates them all. From a distance, Shimao is at once commanding and enigmatic. Terraces climb the hills like stairways to the sky, each level defined by walls of quarried stone that gleam faintly in the sunlight. Massive gates punctuate the perimeters, some flanked by megalithic towers, their sheer size creating shadows that stretch across the valleys below. The layout appears both geometric and organic. Circular and square enclosures merge seamlessly with the contours of the hills, suggesting that the builders were attuned not only to function, but also to aesthetic and perhaps symbolic considerations. Standing before these ramparts, it is difficult not to sense the presence of a civilization that envisioned not merely a city, but a monumental statement of order, power, and permanence. Archaeologists date Shimao to around 2300 to 1800 BCE, situating it within the late Neolithic, during a period when complex societies were emerging across East Asia. Excavations have revealed walls more than 10 meters high in their original form, constructed with massive cut stones and intricately fitted layers. Inside the walls lie palatial structures, ceremonial platforms, and traces of elite residences, suggesting a hierarchical society capable of unprecedented organization. The scale and sophistication of the construction, particularly the walls, imply knowledge of logistics, planning, and labor mobilization on a scale previously thought unattainable for this era. Mainstream scholarship interprets Shimao as a fortified city with both practical and ceremonial functions. The walls and gates provided defense against potential invaders, while the terraces, towers, and inner compounds likely served administrative, social, and religious purposes. Artifacts recovered from the site, including jade objects, pottery, and remains of sacrificial animals, indicate ritual activity, hinting at a culture that integrated governance, spirituality, and architectural grandeur in a way that resonates with later Chinese dynasties. Yet, as with many of the extraordinary structures we have explored, Shimao presents puzzles that resist straightforward explanation. The sheer size of the megalithic stones, some weighing tens of tons, raises questions about how such materials were quarried, transported, and precisely positioned without metal tools or draft animals capable of bearing such loads. How was labor organized? And how long did the construction take? Were specialized techniques or knowledge transmitted across generations now lost to history? The answers remain tantalizingly out of reach. Even more intriguing is the apparent integration of astronomy and symbolism within the city's layout. Certain walls and gates align with celestial events, including solstices and equinoxes, suggesting that the builders may have encoded cosmological knowledge into the architecture itself. Some platforms and terraces offer vantage points over distant mountains, rivers, or the horizon, possibly for observation, ritual, or territorial signaling. Were these alignments intentional, part of a larger cosmological vision, or coincidental? And if intentional, what beliefs or systems of knowledge guided such precise planning thousands of years ago? The city's scale also implies a sophisticated social structure. Maintaining such monumental walls, terraces, and inner compounds would have required labor, oversight, and logistical coordination on an extraordinary scale. Who commanded these efforts, and how were they justified or organized in a society without written records? Did Shimao operate as a singular centralized authority, or was it a coalition of elite families working collaboratively to construct a shared vision? Some speculative interpretations go even further. Certain scholars suggest that Shimao may have functioned as a ceremonial center for a wider region, a sacred or administrative hub where elites demonstrated power through monumental construction. Others propose that the sheer engineering mastery displayed at the walls could indicate knowledge of structural principles not previously associated with Neolithic societies, possibly including techniques for distributing weight, resisting erosion, or creating defensive resilience. Were these walls purely functional, or did they also serve as a symbol, communicating permanence and control to all who approached? Visiting Shimao today, one is struck by its sense of both presence and absence. The walls, though eroded and partially reconstructed, rise across the plateau like echoes of a once thriving metropolis. The terraces remain visible, stretching across the hillsides, hinting at activity, ceremony, and governance that unfolded millennia ago. Yet the people who built, lived, and died here have vanished, leaving only stone, soil, and artifacts as evidence of their ingenuity. Wind sweeps through the terraces, birds wheel overhead, and the faint sunlight glints off remnants of polished stone, a quiet reminder that time preserves the material but often conceals the meaning. Shimao, like Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Sardinia's sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan, exists in a liminal space between human mastery and enduring mystery. Its massive walls and terraces testify to engineering, organization, and vision, yet their full purpose, method of construction, and cultural context remain partially obscured. Were the walls purely defensive, or were they designed to impress, to align with celestial cycles, or to encode ritual knowledge? Did Shimao's planners possess technical expertise now lost, or was this level of precision the result of incremental learning over generations? As the sun sets over the lush hills of Shanxi, casting long shadows across terraces and walls, the city appears at once monumental and intimate, ancient and immediate. Shimao reminds us that even in the earliest epochs, humans were capable of extraordinary feats of architecture, planning, and vision. And yet, even with centuries of scholarship, much of that knowledge remains hidden. How many aspects of Shimao's construction, purpose, and symbolism will remain unknowable, quietly waiting in stone for those willing to observe, question, and wonder? From the expansive terraces and monumental walls of Shimao in Shanxi, where stone and earth were meticulously shaped into a city that once pulsed with ritual, governance, and human ambition, our exploration now moves westward to the highlands of the South Caucasus. Here, in the rolling plains and gentle hills of Armenia, lie the enigmatic peripheral stone walls of Zorats, a site often overshadowed by the famed megalithic stones it surrounds, yet no less mysterious. Unlike Shimao's sprawling urban grid, Zorats offers a quieter, more subtle form of human ingenuity. Walls and alignments that encircle, divide, and define the landscape, suggesting purpose and precision that still defy full understanding. Approaching Zorats, the first impression is both simple and startling. From the plateau, one sees lines of stones stretching across the grass, low yet deliberate, forming enclosures, corridors, and irregular patterns that hint at design rather than randomness. Many stones are upright, reminiscent of miniature menhirs, while others lie prone, forming solid boundaries that snake across the terrain. The walls are not uniform in height or construction, yet their placement conveys intent. Shadows shift across the formations as the sun moves, and the subtle topography of the land interacts with the stones in ways that suggest a careful relationship between natural and constructed space. Archaeologists generally date Zorats to the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, roughly 3000 to 2000 BCE, contemporaneous with other regional megalithic traditions. While the site is most famous for its central array of standing stones, the peripheral walls, less studied but equally compelling, create a framework that hints at social organization, ritual activity, or territorial delineation. These enclosures, often hundreds of meters long, divide the landscape into sectors whose function remains uncertain. Were they designed to guide movement, to mark sacred or practical boundaries, or to encode knowledge into the land itself? Mainstream explanations propose several practical functions. Some researchers suggest that the peripheral walls acted as livestock enclosures or property markers, organizing space for agricultural activity. Others argue that they served ceremonial or astronomical purposes, perhaps channeling processions or framing the rising and setting sun at specific times of year. Excavations have uncovered few artifacts within these walls, making definitive interpretation challenging. Unlike the central menhirs, which display evidence of ritual activity, the walls are mostly silent, their purpose inferred from placement rather than contents. Yet the physical precision of the walls invites deeper questions. Certain lines run for hundreds of meters with remarkable straightness, despite the uneven terrain and occasional slopes or depressions. Some corners appear deliberately angled, almost as if following celestial or topographical markers. How did prehistoric communities plan and construct such long, consistent alignments without advanced surveying tools? Could they have been marking the sun, moon, or stars, encoding astronomical knowledge in stone? And if so, what cultural or practical needs drove them to integrate such precision into structures that otherwise appear mundane? The peripheral wall's relationship to the central stones is equally puzzling. In some areas, the walls curve around clusters of upright megaliths, while in others they form extended corridors that lead the eye toward distant hills or valleys. Were these walls intended to guide movement through ceremonial landscapes, or did they define zones of social or sacred activity? The ambiguity is compounded by erosion, centuries of grazing, and natural displacement, leaving researchers to reconstruct intent from fragments, shadows, and topographical hints. Speculative interpretations, while unverified, are no less compelling. Some scholars suggest that the walls could reflect an understanding of acoustics, designed to amplify chants or ritual sounds across the plateau. Others propose symbolic or cosmological purposes. The peripheral walls may encode cycles of time, territorial claims, or mythological narratives that have been lost to history. Comparisons with other megalithic traditions, from the Maltese temples to Sardinia's sacred wells, suggest that prehistoric societies often embedded knowledge in landscape, creating multi-layered spaces that combined function, ritual, and observation. Could Zorats represent a similar synthesis, one uniquely adapted to the Armenian highlands? If the stones themselves are modest in size, the total effort to align, position, and maintain them over such distances implies a degree of social organization that challenges assumptions about early Bronze Age communities in the region. How was labor coordinated, and how were decisions made about placement, orientation, and construction techniques? What knowledge guided these choices, practical, symbolic, or both? Visiting the site today, one is struck by the quiet persistence of the peripheral walls. Wind sweeps across the plateau, carrying the scent of dry grass and limestone, while birds circle overhead. Shadows stretch along the stone lines, shifting with the sun and offering fleeting glimpses of geometry and pattern. From certain vantage points, the walls appear to trace invisible pathways or frames, drawing the eye toward distant horizons, nearby ridges or clusters of standing stones. In this silence, it is possible to sense the intent of those who shaped the landscape, even if their exact purpose remains elusive. Zorats Carer, like Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan's Ramparts, occupies a threshold between human understanding and mystery. The walls testify to planning, effort, and social coordination, yet their ultimate purpose, whether practical, ceremonial, symbolic, or astronomical, remains unresolved. Were they defensive, functional, or sacred? Did they serve as frameworks for ritual, territorial markers, or cosmic observation? Or perhaps they fulfilled all these roles simultaneously, in ways we can glimpse but not fully comprehend. As the sun dips toward the horizon, casting long, shifting shadows across the plateau, the peripheral walls of Zorats Carer seem to extend beyond their physical forms, into questions about human intention, knowledge, and expression. They remind us that even structures built from seemingly simple materials can encode complexity, vision, and perhaps wisdom that survives only in stone. And in that quiet presence, the walls pose a lingering question that echoes across every ancient site we have explored. How much of the ingenuity, belief, and knowledge of our ancestors remains hidden, inscribed in landscapes that have silently witnessed the passage of millennia? From the high plains of Armenia, where Zorats Carer's peripheral stone walls stretch silently across wind-swept hills, a quiet sense of human intent lingers, intent that survives in stone yet remains elusive to modern understanding. Our journey now returns to the British Isles, to the rugged, wind-swept landscapes of Cornwall, England, where the Iron Age village of Carn Euny sits nestled among rolling hills and farmland. Unlike Zorats Carer, where linear stone walls define the landscape, Carn Euny is a settlement of habitation and mystery, notable not only for its stone hut circles, but for the subterranean passage that threads beneath the earth, a fogu, whose purpose continues to captivate and perplex. Approaching Carn Euny, the village appears deceptively modest. Low, circular stone foundations mark the footprints of homes, their dry stone walls weathered and softened by centuries of rain, moss, and fog. The outline of each hut circle hints at domestic life. Hearths, entrances, and raised platforms suggest habitation, storage, and community. Yet it is the fogu, a narrow, stone-lined passage descending into darkness beneath the village, that draws both fascination and speculation. A visitor feels the atmosphere shift upon approaching the entrance. The air grows cooler, damper, and heavy with the weight of centuries. The passage stretches several meters underground, constructed with carefully fitted stones and capped by massive slabs, creating a space that is both protective and enigmatic. Archaeologists generally date Carn Euny to the Iron Age, roughly 500 BCE to 100 CE, placing it within a period of growing social complexity in southwest Britain. The fogu is characteristic of Cornish and some Devonian settlements, yet its exact function is hotly debated. Mainstream interpretations suggest it may have served as storage for food, shelter during raids, or a means of escape. The passage's cool, stable temperatures would indeed have been useful for preserving perishables, and its narrow, concealed entry could offer refuge from attackers. Yet practical explanations alone fail to account for the effort invested in carving and lining the stone tunnel with such precision. The construction of the fogu is remarkable. The stone slabs forming the walls and roof are massive, some weighing several tons, yet they are placed with careful alignment, resisting collapse despite centuries of earth movement and rainfall. The passage twists slightly as it descends, leading into an enclosed chamber at its end. The design suggests more than functional storage. The space has a sense of intentionality, an experience crafted in stone. Could it have been used for ritual, or as a transitional space between the world above and an imagined underworld below? And if so, what ceremonies or observances might have taken place in this quiet subterranean architecture? Some researchers propose that fogus like the one at Carn Euny were ritual spaces, perhaps connected to ancestor worship, fertility rites, or communication with the spiritual world. The cool darkness, the echoing chambers, and the narrow entrances create an environment conducive to contemplation or ceremony. Could the fogu have functioned as a sacred space where villagers engaged in rituals aligned with lunar or solar cycles? Others note the acoustical qualities of similar passages. Sounds resonate and amplify within the stone-lined corridors, potentially enhancing chants, songs, or incantations. Was this a deliberate feature, an element of spiritual practice encoded in architecture? There are also suggestions of symbolic or social significance. Subterranean spaces often represent thresholds, boundaries between realms, living and dead, or community and wilderness. The fogu may have embodied this liminality, serving as a place of transition, reflection, or initiation. Its location beneath the village reinforces this duality, intimately connected to daily life above, yet separated, hidden, and enigmatic. The inhabitants of Carn Euny invested considerable labor to create a space that is simultaneously utilitarian and mysterious, practical and symbolic. The village itself adds further layers of intrigue. The stone hut circles are meticulously arranged along terraces, sometimes aligned with natural features such as hills, streams, or sunrises. The combination of domestic spaces with subterranean passages suggests a community attuned to both the visible and hidden aspects of their environment. Could the placement of the fogu relative to the huts have reflected social hierarchy, spiritual orientation, or patterns of seasonal use? And what other knowledge, now lost, might have guided their design choices? Speculative interpretations extend beyond Cornwall. Some scholars have drawn parallels between fogus and underground passageways found in Mediterranean and Atlantic Europe, suggesting that similar concepts of subterranean ritual or storage may have emerged independently across regions. The construction precision, deliberate spatial organization, and potential alignment with celestial or seasonal events hint at a level of understanding that modern visitors can admire, but not fully decode. Could these passages have been part of a broader network of knowledge, practical, symbolic, or both, transmitted across communities and generations? Visiting Carn Euny today, the village sits quietly among the misty hills. The hut circles are worn but discernible, and the fogu waits in its subterranean calm. Descending the stone-lined passage, the air grows cool and still, the sound of footsteps echoing softly along the walls. Sunlight from above filters faintly through gaps in the stone roof, illuminating patterns of moss and shadow. One senses the labor, intention, and perhaps reverence embedded in every stone, an invitation to ponder lives, practices, and knowledge that have vanished into time. Carn Euny, like Zorats Carer, Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic Sacred Wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan, exists in a space where human skill, ingenuity, and mystery converge. The fogu is at once tangible and unknowable, functional and symbolic, intimate and imposing. Was it a refuge, a storage space, a ritual chamber, or all three? Did it serve a practical community need, a spiritual purpose, or a form of encoded knowledge? Or are its meanings layered, intentionally complex, and now partially lost to the centuries? As one emerges from the cool darkness of the fogu into the open Cornish air, the village spreads across the hillside, ancient yet enduring. Carn Euny reminds us that even small settlements can harbor profound ingenuity and mystery, and in that quiet presence, one is left with the same persistent question that echoes across all the extraordinary sites we have explored. How much of humanity's ancient understanding, practical, spiritual, and symbolic, remains hidden, waiting for those who observe carefully enough to perceive its silent testimony? From the fog-shrouded corridors of Carn Euny, where underground passages thread silently beneath Iron Age homes, connecting daily life with mystery and perhaps ritual, our journey now spans oceans and continents to the arid landscapes of northern Chile. Here, perched above the sweeping sands of the Atacama Desert, rises Pukara de Quitor, a stone fortress of staggering endurance and quiet authority. Unlike Cornish fogus, hidden and intimate, this fortress dominates the landscape, a sentinel of stone and earth that has witnessed centuries of human conflict, survival, and ingenuity, yet whose construction and purpose still invite wonder. From a distance, Pukara de Quitor appears as a series of jagged terraces etched into the hillside, each level defined by walls of irregular stones, carefully stacked without mortar. The fortress clings to the rocky outcrop with a presence both natural and deliberate, as though it grew from the earth itself. The walls curve around the contours of the hill, forming enclosures and terraces that protect structures within while commanding sweeping views of the surrounding valley. Sunlight glints on the upper stones, highlighting the precision of construction, while shadows deepen in the lower terraces, giving the site an almost otherworldly texture. Archaeological research dates Pukara de Quitor to the 12th century CE, attributed to the Atacameño people, an indigenous culture adapted to the harsh desert environment. Yet the fortress may have origins stretching earlier, incorporating earlier defensive structures into its layered walls. Its position above the San Pedro River Valley suggests strategic insight. It controls both access and visibility, overseeing the limited arable land and trade routes in one of the driest regions on Earth. The fortress is more than a collection of walls. It is a sophisticated integration of landscape, geology, and human planning, crafted to endure both environmental and human threats. Mainstream explanations describe Pukara de Quitor primarily as a defensive structure, built to protect local communities from rival tribes and, later, Spanish incursions. The walls, though irregular in form, are remarkably stable, with terraces distributing weight and resisting erosion. Narrow gates and elevated platforms provide vantage points, allowing defenders to monitor approaching threats. The fortress's complex layout, interlocking terraces, small enclosures, and angled walls, reflects a level of military architecture that is sophisticated for its era, particularly given the technological limitations of its builders. Yet Pukara de Quitor presents enigmas beyond its practical use. The fortress exhibits construction choices that suggest symbolic or ritual significance. Certain terraces align with distant mountain peaks or river bends, creating sight lines that may have held spiritual or cosmological meaning. Could these alignments have been intended to connect the fortress with sacred geography, or to signal to distant observers? Some terraces include stones shaped or placed with a precision that seems unnecessary for defense alone, hinting at aesthetic or symbolic intent. Were these design choices purely cultural, or did they encode knowledge, astronomical, territorial, or social, that has been lost. The scale of construction also raises logistical questions. Transporting large stones up steep hillsides, stacking them into stable walls without mortar, and integrating terraces into natural slopes would have required careful planning, organization, and communal effort. How were materials sourced and moved in an arid environment with limited water and sparse resources? How did the builders ensure structural integrity over centuries, anticipating erosion and seismic activity? The answers remain largely inferential, drawn from observation rather than written record. Speculative interpretations deepen the mystery. Some researchers suggest that Pukara de Quitor may have functioned as a ceremonial center as well as a fortress. The interplay of terraces, walls, and sightlines could have facilitated ritual processions or astronomical observations. Could the fortress have served as a locus of communal identity, a place where social hierarchy, religious practice, and territorial control converged? Others note that the site's endurance, withstanding centuries of earthquakes, floods, and human occupation, may reflect knowledge of construction principles that exceeded contemporary expectations, hinting at sophisticated engineering intuition. The fortress also invites reflection on human resilience and adaptation. Constructed in one of the harshest deserts on Earth, Pukara de Quitor demonstrates the Atacameño people's ability to integrate architecture with environment. Water channels, terraces, and strategic positioning reveal a deep understanding of the landscape's limitations and potentials. Yet the fortress remains enigmatic. It is both a practical response to necessity and a monument whose full significance, social, spiritual, or strategic, remains only partially understood. Visiting Pukara de Quitor today, one feels both awe and quiet introspection. The walls rise along rocky terraces, their rough surfaces worn but steadfast. From the upper platforms, the valley stretches below, shimmering under the desert sun, while the river winds through sand and stone, unchanged across centuries. The fortress, silent yet commanding, evokes both human ingenuity and enduring mystery, a reminder of the knowledge, planning, and purpose that once animated these stones. Pukara de Quitor, like Carn Euny, Zorats Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dawn, occupies a threshold between the known and the unexplained. Its walls testify to technical skill, strategic vision, and social organization. Yet the full depth of its meaning, why certain terraces rise where they do, why stones are placed with particular precision, what rituals or observations may have occurred within its enclosures, remains elusive. Was it purely defensive, or was there a layered purpose combining strategy, symbolism, and ritual? Did it encode knowledge of landscape, astronomy, or social hierarchy in ways now lost? As the sun dips toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the terraces, Pukara de Quitor seems both enduring and ephemeral. It reminds us that ancient societies, separated from us by centuries and continents, were capable of feats that combined practicality, vision, and perhaps even a subtle understanding of the cosmos. And in that quiet presence, one is left with the enduring question that threads through every extraordinary sight we have explored. How much of humanity's ancient knowledge, ingenuity, and intention remains hidden in stone, waiting for us to notice, and perhaps never fully reveal its secrets? From the stone terraces and commanding presence of Pukara de Quitor in the Atacama, where walls rise above arid sands and whisper of human ingenuity, strategy, and endurance, our exploration now shifts westward once more, to the volcanic landscapes of the Canary Islands, where the Valerón Caves of Gran Canaria carve an entirely different kind of mystery into stone. Here, the rock itself has been hollowed, not to fortify or defend, but to store, preserve, and perhaps ritualize, creating an underground network that speaks of human adaptation, ingenuity, and an enigmatic connection to the natural world. Approaching the Valerón Caves, one is immediately struck by the sight of hundreds of niches, cut meticulously into the volcanic tuff of the hillside. The site stretches across a gentle slope, its terraced cavities forming a dense mosaic of human activity frozen in stone. Sunlight illuminates some sections, casting shadows that emphasize the precision and uniformity of the cuttings, while other areas remain shaded, their recesses almost whispering from the past. The walls are smooth, the niches regularly spaced, and the network of channels and galleries suggests careful planning rather than random excavation. It is a place both practical and mysterious, functional yet imbued with a silent presence that evokes curiosity and wonder. Archaeologists date the Valerón Caves to the pre-Hispanic period, attributed to the Canaanite people, roughly between 500 and 1400 CE. They are widely interpreted as a communal granary, a place where harvested grains and cereals could be stored safely, protected from humidity, animals, and perhaps theft. Yet even within this practical explanation, the site defies simple understanding. The sheer scale is astonishing. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of niches carved directly into rock, interconnected by narrow passageways and terraces that conform to the slope of the hill. The effort required to hollow these cavities with stone tools, to maintain uniformity and accessibility, speaks of organization, labor, and knowledge far beyond what might be expected of a small island community. The construction itself provokes questions. How were the niches carved with such consistency? What techniques did the Canary employ to ensure that the rock did not crumble under weight or pressure? Some niches are shallow, others deep, suggesting an intentional differentiation of use. Was this functional sorting grains by type or quality? Or did the variation carry symbolic or ritual significance, marking social hierarchy, seasonal cycles, or sacred times? The granary is both utilitarian and architectural, but its design hints at layers of meaning beyond mere storage. Mainstream scholarship emphasizes the practical advantages of rock-cut storage. The volcanic tuff provides natural insulation, keeping temperature and humidity relatively stable, an invaluable feature in Gran Canaria's arid climate. The elevated location offers visibility and security, while the terraced arrangement maximizes capacity and accessibility. Yet such practicalities alone do not explain why the effort to carve hundreds of niches into solid rock was undertaken. Could there have been additional motives, ritual, symbolic, or even astronomical, embedded in the layout? Some researchers speculate that the caves may have served dual purposes, part granary, part ceremonial space. The repetitive geometry, the orderly arrangement, and the elevated position suggest a community attentive not only to function but also to experience. Were the Canarii performing rituals associated with the harvest, the seasons, or fertility within these chambers? Did the act of storage itself hold spiritual significance, transforming mundane sustenance into a connection between humans and the land, or perhaps between humans and the divine? Other observations deepen the mystery. The niches are remarkably uniform, suggesting standardized measurement or sophisticated knowledge of geometry. Pathways connect terraces in ways that optimize movement and accessibility, almost like an early form of architectural planning, adapted to both labor and oversight. Some scholars note alignments that coincide with prominent landscape features, like distant ridges or the rising sun at certain times of year. Were these alignments intentional, integrating environmental awareness, astronomy, or ritual into the daily act of storing and retrieving food? Or were they an intuitive response to the contours of the land? Visiting Valerón today, the caves carry a palpable sense of human presence across centuries. The volcanic stone is smooth under the fingertips, evidence of careful shaping and repeated use. Shadows creep along the walls as sunlight shifts, illuminating different niches in turn, and creating a subtle interplay of light and dark that enhances the sense of mystery. Birds and insects have reclaimed portions of the site, adding a living dimension to the otherwise silent stone. Walking through the terraces and tunnels, one senses both utility and intention, a fusion of practical knowledge and human imagination. Valerón, like Pukara de Quitor, Carn, Euny, Zorats Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic Sacred Wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan, occupies the space where human skill meets enduring mystery. It is undeniably a product of careful planning, social cooperation, and technical ability. Yet its full significance, why certain niches were placed where they are, whether their placement encodes ritual or symbolic meaning, or whether some knowledge about their construction has been lost to time, remains unresolved. Were the caves purely functional, or was the act of creating and using them imbued with layers of meaning, connecting the community to the land, the sky, and each other? As the sun dips over the volcanic ridges of Gran Canaria, casting long shadows across the terraced stone, the Valerón Caves stand as a silent witness to ingenuity, adaptation, and perhaps ritual practice. They remind us that human creativity, even in its most practical forms, can carry depth, intentionality, and mystery. And in that quiet presence, one is left with the same enduring question that resonates through all the extraordinary sites we have explored. How much of our ancestors' knowledge, belief, and purpose remains hidden, waiting silently in stone, waiting for us to wonder and perhaps never fully understand? From the volcanic terraces and hollowed chambers of Gran Canaria, where the Valerón Caves reveal a community's ingenuity, foresight, and perhaps ritual life, our exploration now returns to the arid landscapes of South America. In the coastal desert of Peru, near the Casma Valley, stand the Chankillo monumental towers, an extraordinary row of stone structures unlike any other. Unlike circular stone arrangements or subterranean passages, these towers stretch in a linear sequence across a low ridge, their uniform height and spacing creating a visual rhythm that immediately arrests the eye, suggesting purpose, precision, and knowledge that transcends simple construction. Approaching Chankillo, one is struck by the alignment of 13 tall, narrow stone towers rising from the ridge like sentinels frozen in time. They are non-circular, rectangular in form, evenly spaced, and remarkably consistent in height, giving the impression of a deliberate sequence rather than scattered fortifications. From a distance, the towers are visible for miles across the barren desert, while closer inspection reveals foundations carefully leveled and stones meticulously shaped and fitted. Between the towers, low enclosures and auxiliary walls hint at complex human activity, though the primary feature remains the monumental linearity, a structure that seems designed to interact with both space and time. Archaeologists date Chankillo to roughly 300 BCE, attributing it to pre-Incan cultures in the region. Early interpretations considered the towers defensive or ceremonial, perhaps serving as lookout points or fortified positions. Yet the uniform spacing and alignment along the ridge resisted explanation under conventional frameworks. The site is neither a fortress nor a settlement in the usual sense. It occupies a transitional space, commanding the surrounding valleys while remaining distinct from the clustered habitations that would have housed its builders. Modern research has revealed an astonishing function. Chankillo appears to have been an astronomical observatory. The tower's placement aligns precisely with the sun's rising and setting positions throughout the year, marking solstices, equinoxes, and intermediate points. Observers from designated platforms east and west of the ridge could track the sun's movement along the towers, creating a solar calendar capable of guiding agricultural and ritual cycles. The precision of this arrangement is striking. It suggests careful observation over generations, meticulous planning, and the encoding of celestial knowledge into monumental stone. Yet even this explanation opens deeper questions. How did the builders acquire such precise understanding of the sun's annual path without written records or advanced instruments? How were the towers constructed with such uniformity in height and width, across uneven terrain, and aligned with astronomical markers spanning nearly half a mile? The work would have required not only communal labor, but also sophisticated surveying, measurement, and spatial reasoning. Was there a specialized class of astronomer builders, or did knowledge emerge collectively through observation and trial over generations? Beyond the solar alignment, the site's broader context invites speculation. The tower's linear, non-circular form contrasts sharply with other monumental structures in the Americas, which often emphasize circles, plazas, or pyramidal forms. Why this unusual geometry? Was linearity a functional choice to map celestial movement accurately, or did it hold symbolic meaning, representing time, order, or authority? Were the enclosures between towers for ceremonial gatherings, storage, or social coordination, and how did they integrate with the astronomical function? The scale of effort is equally compelling. Each tower was constructed from locally quarried stone, yet many stones required precise shaping to create stable vertical structures. Foundations were leveled, walls reinforced, and terraces cut into the ridge to provide stability. In the harsh coastal desert environment, exposed to sun, wind, and occasional rain, the builders ensured that the towers would endure, creating a monument that still rises more than 2 millennia later. Such endurance speaks to technical knowledge, long-term planning, and an understanding of materials and environment that is extraordinary for a pre-literate society. Speculative interpretations extend even further. Some researchers suggest that Chankillo may have integrated practical and ritual purposes. Beyond marking time for agriculture, could the towers have served as a sacred calendar, guiding ceremonies, initiations, or social gatherings in alignment with solar cycles? Could the linearity and repetition of form itself have conveyed meaning, a visual rhythm that reinforced cosmology, authority, or social cohesion? Comparisons with other ancient solar observatories, from Stonehenge to Teotihuacan, suggest that civilizations often encoded both practical and symbolic knowledge into monumental structures. Chankillo may represent a uniquely South American expression of this universal impulse. Visiting the site today, one feels the scale and intention immediately. The desert wind sweeps across the ridge, rustling loose stones and dust, while the sun arcs slowly across the sky, revealing the towers in shifting light. From designated viewing platforms, the alignment becomes apparent. The sun rises and sets in precise relation to the towers, a spectacle of ancient observation frozen in stone. Walking between the towers, tracing the path of sunlight and shadow, one senses the labor, foresight, and perhaps reverence invested by those who conceived and built this extraordinary structure. Chankillo, like the Valerón Caves, Pukara de Quitor, Carn Euny, Zorats Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan, exists at the intersection of human skill and enduring mystery. Its precision, scale, and orientation testify to observation, planning, and technical ability, yet the full extent of its purpose, how it guided agricultural, ritual, or social practices, what symbolic meaning the linear towers may have held, and what additional knowledge was encoded in the surrounding terraces, remains largely speculative. Was Chankillo purely functional, or did it embody a philosophical or cosmological vision, integrating time, landscape, and human experience into monumental stone? As the sun dips toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the ridge and illuminating each tower in turn, Chankillo stands as a silent chronicle of observation, ingenuity, and human curiosity. It reminds us that ancient civilizations, across continents and millennia, repeatedly sought to encode knowledge, rhythm, and meaning into stone. And in that quiet endurance, one is left with the same lingering question that threads through every extraordinary structure we have explored. How much of humanity's ancient understanding, its skill and vision, remains hidden in stone, awaiting rediscovery, or perhaps destined to remain a mystery? From the linear rhythm of Chankillo's monumental towers in Peru, where sun, stone, and human observation converge in a solar symphony frozen across the desert ridge, our exploration now returns to the African continent, to the highlands of northern Ethiopia. Here, amidst rugged hills and fertile valleys, stands the Yeha Great Temple, an ancient edifice whose carefully dressed stones, massive columns, and enduring presence speak of a civilization both sophisticated and enigmatic. Unlike Chankillo, where alignment and function dominate, Yeha exudes a different aura, one of permanence, ritual, and a silent dialogue between human ambition and sacred landscape. Approaching Yeha, the first impression is commanding yet austere. The temple's rectangular footprint is defined by imposing stone walls, each block meticulously cut and fitted with remarkable precision. The main structure rises above the surrounding village, its stonework evoking a sense of order and endurance. Massive monolithic columns, carefully spaced, line the interior and support lintels carved with attention to proportion and alignment. Light falls across the surfaces, revealing subtle variations in texture, hue, and craftsmanship that hint at sophisticated techniques and aesthetic sensibilities. Even the surrounding terrain seems chosen with deliberation. Gentle terraces lead toward the temple, while distant ridges and valleys frame the structure, reinforcing both its visibility and significance. Archaeological studies date Yeha to around 700 BCE, attributing it to the pre-Aksumite, Sabaean-influenced civilization of northern Ethiopia. It is considered one of the oldest standing stone structures in sub-Saharan Africa, suggesting an early mastery of masonry and monumental architecture. The temple's construction, with massive, precisely cut stones fitted without mortar, demonstrates engineering knowledge and technical skill that would remain unsurpassed in the region for centuries. Lintels, doorways, and columns all align in ways that speak to deliberate planning, structural understanding, and possibly symbolic intent. Mainstream interpretations view Yeha primarily as a religious center, likely dedicated to a pre-Christian, South Arabian-influenced pantheon. Its design parallels temples found across the Red Sea in Yemen, yet with local adaptations that respond to climate, materials, and culture. The site may have served as a hub of worship, ritual, and political authority, uniting spiritual practice with social governance. Excavations have revealed artifacts such as inscriptions, pottery, and ceremonial objects, further attesting to the temple's significance in the lives of those who built and maintained it. Yet, as with many of the structures we have encountered, Yeha presents enigmas that remain unresolved. The precision of the masonry is striking. Massive stones, some weighing several tons, are cut and fitted so accurately that a knife blade cannot pass between blocks. How did pre-Aksumite builders achieve such accuracy without advanced metal tools or machinery? What knowledge guided the quarrying, transport, and placement of these massive blocks across uneven terrain? And how were structural principles understood well enough to allow such tall, columned interiors without collapse? The temple's alignment and orientation add further mystery. Its main axis is oriented east-west, but subtle variations appear in relation to surrounding topographical features, suggesting that the builders may have considered both celestial and geographic factors. Could the temple have functioned as an astronomical marker, tracking the sun, stars, or seasonal cycles? Did its orientation convey symbolic meaning, perhaps relating to cosmology, sacred geography, or ritual timing? The integration of natural and built environment hints at layers of intentionality that go beyond practical concerns. Some researchers speculate that Yeha's design may encode ritual or symbolic knowledge, much as Chankillo does with solar observation. The placement of columns, the dimensions of the main hall, and the proportional spacing of walls may have reflected cosmological, numerological, or ceremonial principles now lost to us. The combination of scale, precision, and aesthetic restraint suggests a culture capable of merging technical expertise with spiritual or symbolic vision. Could Yeha have served simultaneously as a temple, a ceremonial calendar, and a statement of social or political authority? And if so, what knowledge or traditions guided its builders? Knowledge that was never written down, but instead inscribed in stone and space. The human effort required to construct Yeha also invites reflection. Moving and shaping massive stones, coordinating labor, and ensuring structural integrity would have demanded planning, skill, and communal organization. Who oversaw this work? Was there a class of specialized architects or artisans, or did knowledge emerge through generational apprenticeship? And beyond practical concerns, what cultural imperatives, religion, identity, or power drove the immense effort to create a structure that would endure for millennia? Visiting Yeha today, the temple rises against the sky, silent yet monumental. Shadows lengthen across stone terraces and columns as the sun arcs overhead, highlighting the careful geometry and weathered surfaces. From a distance, the building dominates the landscape, while up close, the craftsmanship of each block is palpable, revealing the human touch embedded in massive stone. Walking among the columns and along the walls, one senses both the technical skill and the intentionality behind every decision, the result of a civilization capable of marrying vision, labor, and devotion in a single enduring edifice. Yeha, like Chankillo, Valerón, Pukara de Quitor, Carn Euny, Zorats Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan, occupies a liminal space between human mastery and enduring mystery. Its walls, columns, and terraces testify to technical knowledge, architectural vision, and social organization. Yet the full depth of its meaning, why specific alignments were chosen, what rituals were performed, and what symbolic knowledge may be encoded in stone, remains elusive. Was Yeha purely a religious center, or did it serve multiple functions, integrating governance, ritual, and celestial observation? As the sun dips over the northern Ethiopian highlands, casting long shadows across terraces and columns, the Yeha Great Temple stands as a testament to ingenuity, foresight, and enduring mystery. It reminds us that even in the earliest centuries of organized civilization, humans were capable of remarkable feats of architecture and planning, embedding purpose, knowledge, and symbolism in stone. And in that quiet, monumental presence, one is left with the same enduring question that threads through every extraordinary structure we have explored. How much of our ancestors' knowledge, belief, and intention remains hidden, waiting silently to be discovered, or perhaps destined to remain a mystery? From the monumental precision of Yeha in Ethiopia, where stone and vision converge to create a temple both enduring and enigmatic, our journey moves east across the African continent, into the remote plains of northern Kenya. Here, near the western shores of Lake Turkana, rise the Namoratunga II stone pillars, a collection of megaliths whose alignment, scale, and subtle astronomical properties speak of a Bronze to Iron Age community deeply attuned to both landscape and cosmos. Unlike Yeha, with its towering walls and ceremonial grandeur, Namoratunga II is understated, yet its simplicity conceals complexity, inviting speculation about its purpose, knowledge, and the worldview of those who erected it. Approaching the site, the first impression is quiet, yet commanding. The pillars are not tall monoliths, but modest in height, rising just a meter or so above the ground. They are arranged in precise rows and clusters, some forming linear sequences while others appear in circular or semicircular patterns. Each stone is roughly shaped, weathered by centuries of wind and sun, yet the arrangement suggests careful planning. From above, or in the mind's eye of those who placed them, the geometry becomes evident: lines, angles, and distances that are too regular to be random. The stones interact subtly with the surrounding terrain, positioned along ridges and open plains, with sightlines stretching to distant hills and horizons. Archaeological evidence places Namoratunga II roughly between 1000 BCE and 500 CE, spanning the transition from late Bronze Age into the early Iron Age in the region. Radiocarbon dating from associated charcoal and organic deposits confirms long-term use of the site, yet the purpose of the pillars remains elusive. Some stones are inscribed with cup marks, small hollows carved into their surfaces, while others are unadorned. The markings are subtle, often only visible when the sun strikes them at low angles, suggesting a potential interaction with light and shadow. Was this decorative, symbolic, or functional, a coded language of celestial observation? Mainstream explanations suggest that Namoratunga II functioned as a form of early astronomical observatory. The alignment of certain rows corresponds roughly to solstitial sunrise and sunset positions, allowing observers to track seasonal changes. In a region where rainfall is scarce and agricultural cycles depend on precise timing, understanding seasonal shifts would have been vital. The pillars may have marked these celestial events, providing a framework for planting, harvesting, and ritual timing. Yet even this functional interpretation leaves many questions unanswered. How did the builders achieve such precise alignment without sophisticated tools? Were there trained astronomer priests guiding the placement of each stone, or did communal observation over generations produce this knowledge intuitively? Beyond the practical, there is an unmistakable air of ritual or symbolic purpose. The cup marks and arrangements suggest that the stones were more than simple markers. They may have functioned as points of reference for ceremony, initiation, or social cohesion. The semicircular clusters, in particular, invite speculation. Could they have represented sacred enclosures, boundaries between worlds, or gathering spaces for communal rituals? The linear rows extending across the landscape suggest measurement, observation, or procession. Was Namoratunga II a calendar, a temple, or both? A place where time, landscape, and human activity intersected in stone. The construction itself presents further enigmas. While the stones are relatively small compared to other megalithic traditions, moving, shaping, and aligning dozens of pillars across uneven terrain requires coordination, planning, and sustained effort. Some stones are embedded in shallow pits, stabilizing them against shifting soil and seasonal rains. Others are deliberately placed on bedrock, suggesting careful consideration of geological stability. Did the builders understand principles of weight, balance, and longevity intuitively, or through accumulated experience? And why invest so much effort in stones that, on first glance, appear modest, unless their placement carried significance beyond the material? The location of Namoratunga II enhances its mystery. The site occupies open plains near the terminus of small seasonal rivers, with distant ridges marking the horizon. Its elevated perspective allows observation of both sunrise and sunset along critical points of the solar and perhaps lunar cycles. Could the selection of this site reflect an understanding of the interplay between terrestrial topography and celestial movement? Were the builders tracking stars as well as the sun, using the pillars as markers for navigational or ritual purposes? Some scholars have noted potential alignments with bright stars, though the evidence is debated, leaving room for speculation without certainty. Comparisons with other megalithic traditions deepen the intrigue. Like Chankillo in Peru, Namoratunga II may encode solar knowledge in stone. Like Yeha, it demonstrates technical skill and intentional placement, yet it is uniquely African, blending modest scale with astronomical and symbolic function. The combination of practical observation and ritual suggestion implies a worldview in which time, landscape, and human activity were inseparable. A society attuned to celestial rhythms and capable of translating them into enduring stone arrangements. Visiting the site today, the pillars rise quietly against the vast expanse of the Turkana Plains. Wind sweeps across the flat terrain, carrying dust and the faint scent of dry grasses. Shadows stretch across the rows, accentuating alignments that may have marked seasonal sunrises millennia ago. The cup marks catch light at certain angles, hinting at subtle knowledge encoded in stone. Walking between the pillars, one senses the intersection of labor, observation, and intentionality, as if the builder's presence lingers in the measured spaces between each stone. Namoratunga II, like Yeha, Chankillo, Valerón, Pukara de Quitor, Carn Euny, Zorats Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Teldan occupies a threshold between human understanding and enduring mystery. Its precise alignments, subtle markings, and careful placement testify to knowledge, observation, and communal effort, yet the full depth of its purpose remains elusive. Was it purely an astronomical tool, or did it serve layered functions, ritual, social, symbolic, and practical? Did it encode understanding of celestial cycles, societal organization, or spiritual belief that we can only glimpse today? As the sun arcs low across the Turkana horizon, casting long shadows across the aligned pillars, Namoratunga II reveals both clarity and ambiguity. The stones speak of observation, care, and social organization, yet their meaning is only partially accessible to modern eyes. In their quiet persistence, they pose the same enduring question that resonates across all extraordinary sites we have explored. How much of humanity's ancient knowledge, its understanding of time, cosmos, and landscape remains etched in stone, waiting to be seen, interpreted, or perhaps forever hidden in the silence of the ages? From the aligned stone pillars of Namoratunga to in the Turkana Plains of Kenya, where subtle geometry and astronomical observation converge in understated yet precise form, our exploration now crosses continents once more, moving into the rolling hills of central Bulgaria. Here, perched quietly among gentle landscapes and agricultural fields, stands the Zlatosel Dolmen, a monumental stone burial chamber accompanied by a single, enigmatic stela. Unlike Namoratunga, whose function leans toward astronomical tracking and communal observation, Zlatosel presents a more intimate, solemn, and enduring encounter. A space carved from stone to honor the dead, yet imbued with mysteries that have persisted for millennia. Approaching the dolmen, the first impression is one of solemnity and permanence. 3 massive slabs rise from the earth to form a rectangular chamber, their surfaces weathered by centuries of wind, rain, and frost, yet still impeccably aligned. A 4th slab rests atop as a capstone, bridging the vertical supports with quiet authority. Nearby stands the stela, a vertical stone bearing faint carvings, whose meaning has puzzled scholars for decades. The dolmen's construction is deceptively simple in form, yet the precision, weight, and balance required to erect such a structure reveal a community capable of remarkable technical skill and understanding of stonework. Sunlight glances off the slabs, highlighting faint lichen patterns and subtle irregularities in the rock that speak to both natural wear and the human hand that shaped them. Archaeological studies date Zlatosel Dolmen to the Late Bronze Age, roughly 14th to 13th centuries BCE, a period characterized across Europe by social stratification, long-distance trade, and increasingly complex funerary practices. Dolmens were widespread during this time, marking the graves of elites or serving as ritual focal points. Excavations within the chamber have revealed traces of burnt human bones, fragments of pottery, and occasional personal artifacts, tokens of a culture that invested labor and reverence in preparing its dead for what was believed to lie beyond. Yet, despite these findings, many aspects of Zlatosel remain elusive. Mainstream interpretations emphasize the dolmen as a burial monument, yet several features resist simple classification. The massive capstone, weighing several tons, was transported and lifted into place without mortar or metal cranes, indicating a profound understanding of leverage, geometry, and teamwork. How did a Bronze Age community coordinate such effort? Were there specialized roles, guiding knowledge passed across generations, or a communal memory of engineering techniques now lost? And why this particular location, on a modest hill overlooking fields and valleys, yet isolated enough to emphasize its significance? The stela adds another layer of intrigue. Standing a few meters from the dolmen, its surface bears incised markings, lines, grooves, and faint symbols whose meaning is still debated. Some researchers suggest these may have astronomical or calendrical significance, tracking lunar or solar cycles much like other prehistoric monuments. Others propose symbolic representation, depictions of deities, ancestors, or cosmological concepts encoded in abstract form. Could the stela have functioned as a guide or marker, connecting the living community with the deceased in the dolmen? Or was it part of a ritual sequence performed during interments, a visual language whose logic we can only guess at? The construction also raises broader questions about knowledge transfer and cultural interconnectedness. Similar dolmens appear across the Balkans and Western Europe, yet Zlatosel's proportions and stela placement are distinctive. The alignment of the chamber may correspond with celestial events, the solstices, perhaps, or certain lunar phases, though the evidence is subtle, requiring careful observation to detect. Did the builders deliberately encode astronomical knowledge, using the dolmen and stela as instruments of orientation or ritual timing? And if so, what might this reveal about their understanding of cycles, time, and the cosmos? Beyond technical and astronomical questions, there is a more human dimension. The dolmen embodies a profound sense of memory and reverence. The labor, planning, and care required to erect such a structure suggest a community deeply engaged with notions of ancestry, mortality, and the afterlife. Was the dolmen intended solely as a tomb, or did it also serve as a locus for communal gatherings, ritual performance, or veneration? Did the act of creating the dolmen strengthen social cohesion, asserting the status of certain lineages or individuals within the wider community? Speculative interpretations extend the mystery even further. Some researchers suggest that dolmens like Zlatosel were intentionally aligned with landscape features, distant hills, rivers, or valleys, to symbolize boundaries between the living and the dead, or to connect the earthly realm with the heavens. Others propose that the stela may encode knowledge of seasonal cycles, cosmology, or mythic narratives, linking the monument to the broader cultural and spiritual worldview of Bronze Age communities. Could this integration of landscape, stone, and symbolic markings represent a sophisticated system of knowledge now lost to us, preserved only in the silent geometry of the dolmen? Visiting Zlatosel today, the air is still, carrying the faint scent of grass and soil from surrounding fields. The dolmen rises from the hill like a monument to both labor and memory, its stones cool under the afternoon sun. Shadows pool around the base, emphasizing the solidity and alignment of each slab. The stela, though smaller, commands attention, a vertical mark that seems both deliberate and enigmatic. Walking between the stones, one senses the rhythm of human activity long ago, the lifting, shaping, and positioning of massive slabs, the careful placement of offerings, the ritual movements and gestures now lost to time. Zlatosel Dolmen, like Namoratunga II, Yeha, Chankillo, Valerón, Pukara de Quitor, Carn Euny, Zorats Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic Sacred Wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan, occupies a space where human skill, intention, and enduring mystery converge. Its massive stones testify to technical ability and social organization. Its stela hints at symbolic, astronomical, or ritual knowledge, yet the full spectrum of meaning remains out of reach. Was Zlatosel purely a burial site, or did it serve multiple layered purposes? Did its builders encode cosmological or calendrical understanding in stone? And what rituals, stories, or beliefs were enacted here, now invisible to the modern eye? As the sun begins to dip behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the dolmen and stela, Zlatosel exudes both permanence and mystery. It is a monument to labor, vision, and belief, enduring across centuries while keeping much of its original purpose veiled. In that quiet presence, one is confronted with the same enduring question that threads through every extraordinary structure we have explored. How much of humanity's ancient knowledge, its understanding of time, the cosmos, and the human spirit remains etched in stone, waiting silently for those who observe carefully enough to perceive it, and perhaps forever resisting complete understanding? From the quiet stone graves of Zlatosel Dolmen in Bulgaria, where monumental slabs and a solitary stela speak of labor, reverence, and knowledge now partially lost to time, our journey turns once again to the rugged landscapes of the Caucasus. Here, perched above the meandering Matkvari River, lies Uplistsikhe, the rock-cut city of Georgia, a sprawling labyrinth of chambers, tunnels, and carved facades that has endured for more than 2 millennia. Unlike dolmens or pillar alignments, Uplistsikhe is not a single monument, but a living, functional city hewn directly from the sandstone cliffs, where human habitation, spirituality, and ingenuity converge in ways that continue to puzzle modern observers. Approaching Uplistsikhe, one is immediately struck by the seamless integration of architecture and geology. The city rises organically from the cliffs, its terraces, stairways, and facades carved directly into the rock. At first glance, the structures seem haphazard, a jumble of rooms and corridors, yet closer inspection reveals order and intent. Spaces carefully oriented along natural slopes, connected by stairways, corridors, and ramps that demonstrate understanding of both structural integrity and functional flow. Light filters through narrow windows and openings, illuminating vast halls with vaulted ceilings, subterranean tunnels, and niches whose purpose is still debated. Each carved chamber hints at daily life, ritual practice, or defensive strategy, creating a sense of human presence that persists across centuries. Archaeologists date Uplistsikhe to as early as the 2nd millennium BCE, with continuous occupation through the early medieval period. It was a political and religious center of remarkable importance, strategically positioned along trade routes that connected the Caucasus with Anatolia and the Middle East. Evidence shows that inhabitants carved homes, bakeries, wine presses, and storage rooms into the rock, creating a city that could sustain itself while blending with the natural landscape. Yet, despite extensive study, questions remain. Why choose sandstone cliffs for an entire city? How was the knowledge of rock cutting, structural support, and urban planning transmitted over generations? And what motivated the integration of sacred and secular spaces in a single, contiguous environment? Mainstream interpretations emphasize practicality and strategic advantage. Uplistsikhe's elevated terraces provided defensive oversight, while the tunnels and hidden chambers allowed for retreat and storage. The rock-cut nature of the city offered insulation against harsh weather and environmental stability that above-ground structures could not match. But even when focusing on these pragmatic explanations, the scale and sophistication are striking. Massive halls with intricately carved columns and ventilated spaces suggest a knowledge of load-bearing principles that predates comparable masonry techniques elsewhere. How did these early builders understand spatial mechanics sufficiently to prevent collapse, particularly in multi-level complexes carved entirely from living rock? Yet Uplistsikhe is not solely utilitarian. Several large halls appear to have served ceremonial or religious purposes, their size, orientation, and ornamentation suggesting ritual significance. Carved altars, niches, and symbolic motifs hint at practices connected to local deities and later influences from Zoroastrian, Christian, and pagan traditions. Could these spaces also have served as astronomical observatories, or did the alignment of certain chambers with sunlight at specific times of year hold ritual significance? Did the architects intend for movement through the city, up stairways into halls and along terraces, to constitute a ceremonial journey, linking daily life with spiritual experience? The city's subterranean tunnels deepen the mystery. Some lead to water sources or storage chambers, while others are narrow and twisting, with no clear practical function. Were these purely defensive, allowing inhabitants to escape or hide during conflict? Or did they serve a symbolic purpose, representing passage between the earthly and the spiritual, the seen and the hidden? Some scholars suggest these tunnels may have been designed to manipulate light and sound, creating sensory effects during rituals that enhanced collective experience. How much of the design was dictated by practical necessity, and how much by belief or psychological impact? Another enigmatic aspect of Uplistsikhe is its hybrid nature. Over centuries, it absorbed diverse cultural influences, yet maintained coherence as a rock-cut city. Hellenistic, Persian, and local Georgian elements merge in its architecture, yet the underlying planning suggests indigenous principles of spatial organization, circulation, and structural logic. How did successive cultures adapt and expand the city without disrupting its overall integrity? Was there a guiding set of architectural or symbolic principles, passed orally or intuitively, that governed additions and modifications over centuries? The sheer labor invested in Uplistsikhe is staggering. Carving entire halls, terraces, and tunnels from solid rock, transporting and shaping materials, and maintaining the city over centuries demonstrates technical skill, social organization, and collective effort. It raises questions about the distribution of labor and knowledge. Who were the master craftsmen, and how was expertise transmitted? How did they coordinate large-scale construction without written plans, using only observation, oral instruction, and practical experience? The endurance of these spaces across earthquakes, weathering, and centuries of human activity suggests a profound understanding of both material and environment. Visiting Uplistsikhe today, one is immediately aware of its scale and intricacy. Sunlight traces the terraces and stairways, illuminating carved facades, vaulted ceilings, and shadowed chambers that hint at life long past. The city seems alive with echoes of its inhabitants, the smell of smoke from ancient hearths, the faint trace of footsteps along stone floors, and the presence of rituals performed millennia ago. Walking along terraces and descending into tunnels, one senses both utility and symbolism, a fusion of practical architecture with spiritual and social meaning that continues to challenge our understanding. Uplistsikhe, like Zlatosel Dolmen, Namoratunga II, Yeha, Chankillo, Valerón, Pukara de Quitor, Carn Euny, Zorats Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic Sacred Wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan, occupies a liminal space between human skill, environmental mastery, and enduring mystery. Its rock-cut chambers testify to technical knowledge and organizational ability, while its ceremonial halls, tunnels, and terraces hint at symbolic, spiritual, and perhaps astronomical understanding. Yet the full spectrum of meaning remains beyond our grasp. Did Uplistsikhe encode a cosmology in its architecture? Did its design reflect ritualized patterns of daily life and spiritual journey? Or did it serve primarily as a pragmatic urban center whose ceremonial and symbolic aspects emerged secondarily? As the afternoon sun dips behind the Caucasian hills, casting long shadows across terraces, stairways, and carved facades, Uplistsikhe seems to breathe with history. Its rooms and tunnels speak of ingenuity, intention, and continuity, yet leave us with more questions than answers. The city challenges assumptions about what early societies could achieve with stone, vision, and collective effort, reminding us that human ambition has always reached beyond the immediate, seeking permanence, order, and meaning. And in that quiet endurance, one is left with the same profound question that threads through every extraordinary site we have explored. How much of our ancestors' understanding of structure, ritual, time, and perhaps even the cosmos remains hidden in stone, waiting for discovery, or destined to remain an unsolved mystery? From the sprawling rock-cut city of Uplistsikhe in Georgia, where tunnels, terraces, and vaulted halls reveal a civilization capable of fusing daily life, ritual, and engineering in seamless stone, our journey turns westward across the Mediterranean to the windswept islands of the Balearics. Here, on Minorca and Majorca, rise the Talayotic Navetas, prehistoric megalithic tombs whose boat-shaped forms punctuate the landscape like silent sentinels of memory and belief. Unlike the labyrinthine complexity of Uplistsikhe, the Navetas are compact, yet monumental, deliberate in their simplicity, each a vessel of the past, holding the bones, stories, and perhaps secrets of a people now vanished from history. Approaching a Naveta, one is immediately struck by its distinctive silhouette. These structures, built from massive limestone blocks, taper at one end, evoking the hull of a ship, a form that is at once functional and symbolic. Thick walls, sometimes more than a meter wide, enclose the interior, while corbelled roofs rise to meet at the apex, creating chambers that could accommodate multiple burials over successive generations. The entrances are narrow, almost ritualistic in their constraint, forcing those who enter to bow or stoop, heightening a sense of transition from the ordinary to the sacred. The interior is both austere and carefully proportioned, with smooth stones interspersed with rougher slabs, as if the builders were negotiating between practicality, material constraints, and an aesthetic or symbolic intention now lost to time. Archaeological evidence dates these structures to the Talayotic period, roughly 1000 to 600 BCE, when the Balearic Islands were home to a complex society known for its monumental stone architecture. Navetas were clearly burial chambers, yet their construction required extraordinary skill and social organization. The massive stones, some weighing several tons, were quarried, transported, and fitted with precision. How did these communities achieve such feats without metal tools of sufficient hardness, cranes, or wheeled vehicles? Were there specialized teams of stonemasons and engineers? Or did practical knowledge emerge gradually, refined through observation and trial over generations? And why invest so much effort in structures that would never house the living, unless these monuments served a purpose beyond the purely functional? The interior of the Navetas reveals further enigmas. Excavations have uncovered human remains, along with pottery, tools, and occasional ornamental objects. Yet these finds only hint at the rituals, beliefs, and social structures that governed burial practices. Some chambers appear to have been reused over centuries, suggesting long-term continuity in cultural memory and social tradition. Was the act of interring the dead in these carefully shaped chambers part of a larger ceremonial framework, where community cohesion, ancestor veneration, or even astronomical observation played a role? The evidence is tantalizing but incomplete. The alignment and placement of navetas across the landscape raise additional questions. Many are oriented along specific axes, sometimes facing prominent hills, open plains, or the rising sun at particular times of year. Could these orientations have marked solstices, equinoxes, or other celestial events, creating a calendar of stone that guided agricultural, ritual, or communal cycles? Were these tombs purely commemorative, or did their design encode knowledge of the heavens, linking the dead with cosmic order? The boat-like form itself invites speculation. Does it represent a vessel for the soul, a symbolic guide for the deceased on a journey to another realm, or simply an aesthetic preference that resonated with the culture of the Talayotic people? Beyond the astronomical and symbolic, there is the technical mastery to consider. The builders of the Navetas understood the principles of load-bearing and structural stability, raising corbelled ceilings with remarkable precision. Stones were carefully shaped to fit, and their immense weight ensured durability against time and the Mediterranean elements. Yet, some aspects remain inexplicable. How did these societies coordinate labor, plan construction without written plans, and maintain the integrity of these chambers over generations? What motivated them to carve such enduring monuments into the landscape, investing communal energy and knowledge into works that primarily honored the dead? The social and ritual significance of Navetas also invites reflection. These were not merely tombs. They were spaces where the living might interact with the memory of their ancestors, where lineage, status, and belief could be expressed in stone. Were ceremonies performed within the narrow interiors, with participants moving carefully through the low entrances and into the central chamber? Did the repetition of form across the islands reflect standardized beliefs? Or did local variation suggest an evolving set of rituals and cosmologies? The presence of multiple burials in the same chamber indicates a communal aspect, where the past was layered upon itself, reinforcing social identity and continuity. Speculative interpretations extend further. Some scholars propose that the Navetas, in their shape, alignment, and repetition across the landscape, served as part of a symbolic map linking the living, the dead, and the cosmos. Could the tapering, boat-like form have represented a spiritual voyage across an afterlife, or a metaphorical journey through time itself? Were the stones themselves considered sacred, charged with ritual significance, or did their placement encode knowledge of lineage, territorial claims, or social order? And what of the markings and subtle architectural variations seen in some Navetas? Are they merely practical, or do they convey a symbolic language now lost to memory? Walking among the Talayotic Navetas today, the landscape unfolds in quiet majesty. The island's golden light illuminates the limestone surfaces, casting long shadows that exaggerate the tapering forms and corbelled roofs. The air carries the scent of Mediterranean scrub and sea breeze, while the silence is punctuated only by distant birdsong. The structures rise from the earth as if embedded with intent, demanding attention and contemplation. Entering a chamber, one senses both the human effort that raised these stones and the cultural imagination that shaped their purpose. The Naveta is more than a tomb. It is a dialogue between living and dead, between human skill and natural landscape, between what is visible and what remains hidden. Talayotic Navetas, like Uplistsikhe, Zlatosel Dolmen, Namoratunga II, Yeha, Chankillo, Valerón, Pukara de Quitor, Carn Euny, Zorats Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan inhabit a space where human ambition, observation, and mystery converge. They testify to technical skill, social organization, and ritualized practice, yet they also resist full interpretation. How much of the Talayotic worldview, its understanding of death, time, lineage, and perhaps the cosmos, is encoded in the shape, orientation, and placement of these Navetas? Did they function primarily as tombs, ceremonial spaces, or a combination of both? And what knowledge, beliefs, or practices have been lost to time, leaving only the stones to speak silently across millennia? As the sun dips low over the Balearic hills, casting elongated shadows across the boat-shaped chambers, the Navetas remain steadfast, silent witnesses to generations of human life, death, and memory. They are monuments of labor, design, and belief, yet their full meaning continues to elude us. In the quiet light, one is reminded once again that across continents, from Georgia to Kenya, Bulgaria to Peru, the Mediterranean to Ethiopia, human civilizations have repeatedly sought to mark existence, order time, and honor the dead with enduring stone. And in that quiet endurance, the question persists: what secrets remain hidden in these structures? And how much of our ancestors' understanding of life, death, and the cosmos is still waiting for discovery or destined to remain a mystery? From the Talayotic Navetas of the Balearic Islands, where boat-shaped stone tombs silently echo the lives, beliefs, and rituals of an island culture now lost to time, our journey shifts south across the Mediterranean, returning to the rugged landscapes of Sardinia. Here, across hills and plateaus, rise the enigmatic Tombe dei Giganti, the so-called giants' graves. These megalithic monuments, with their towering central stones and elongated burial chambers, dominate the landscape with a presence that is at once solemn and awe-inspiring. Unlike the intimate, boat-shaped Navetas, the giants' graves are expansive, communal, and deliberately monumental, inviting questions about the societies that built them, their social structures, and the meaning they embedded in stone. Approaching one of these tombs, the scale immediately arrests the senses. Massive vertical slabs form a semicircular exedra, curving outward like an embracing arm, surrounding a long, narrow chamber that stretches several meters in length. Some of the capstones weigh several tons, balanced atop vertical orthostats with remarkable precision. The exedra, often taller than a standing person, catches the eye with its rhythmic arrangement of stones, a visual statement of permanence and authority. The chambers themselves, accessed through low, narrow entrances, convey a sense of transition. Entering is an act that draws the body into the past, compelling reflection on those who were interred within. Archaeological dating places the giants' graves within the Bronze Age, roughly between 1800 and 1200 BCE, a period dominated by the Nuragic culture of Sardinia. These structures are understood primarily as collective burial sites, yet their scale and design suggest functions extending beyond mere interment. Were these monuments markers of social cohesion, status, or territorial claim? Did they serve as ceremonial spaces where communities gathered to perform rituals linking the living to the dead? The size of the chambers and the number of burials, often dozens within a single structure, imply communal participation and repeated use over generations. Yet the precise social or spiritual logic behind their construction remains obscure. The construction techniques alone provoke admiration and speculation. Moving, shaping, and lifting stones weighing several tons without the use of metal cranes or sophisticated machinery would have required careful planning, coordination, and knowledge of leverage and balance. The capstones are often elongated and evenly positioned, suggesting understanding of weight distribution and stability. How did Bronze Age communities achieve such engineering feats? Were these projects overseen by specialized artisans? Or were they the product of communal labor refined over generations of experience? The effort invested in these tombs hints at a society deeply invested in the symbolism of stone, ritual, and remembrance. The orientation of the tombs adds another layer of intrigue. Many giants' graves are aligned along a roughly east-west axis, with the exedra facing the rising sun. Could this reflect solar symbolism, connecting the deceased with cycles of renewal and the rhythms of nature? Some researchers speculate that particular tombs may also mark lunar events or align with distant landscape features, ridges, hills, or other monuments, indicating an early understanding of celestial observation. Were the architects encoding knowledge of time and the cosmos into these burial sites, linking human life and death to broader cycles of the natural world? Inside the chambers, discoveries deepen the mystery. Excavations have uncovered skeletal remains, pottery shards, personal ornaments, and occasionally tools or weapons, yet these finds rarely provide definitive answers. Were the chambers reserved for particular social groups, leaders, or extended families? Did the arrangement of burials carry symbolic meaning, or were practical concerns, space, accessibility, primary? Some chambers exhibit evidence of repeated interment over generations, indicating that the tombs were active centers of memory, ritual, and perhaps identity, binding communities to ancestors whose names have been lost. The monumental scale of the exedra also invites speculation. The rhythm of the vertical stones, the sweeping curvature, and the sheer mass of the structures suggest intent beyond utility. Were these stones meant to communicate power and permanence to neighboring communities, asserting territorial control or social hierarchy? Or did the imposing arrangement serve a more spiritual purpose, a visual representation of the threshold between life and death, the human and the divine? The alignment, repetition, and proportions of these stones seem deliberate, hinting at a symbolic system whose logic we can only partially reconstruct. Some fringe theories have suggested that the tombs were built for giants, a notion inspired by the sheer size of the stones and the imposing chambers. While these ideas are not supported by scientific evidence, the perception is revealing. The monuments inspire awe precisely because they communicate human ambition scaled to monumental dimensions. The collective effort required to erect them, combined with their enduring presence, conveys authority, reverence, and perhaps a conceptual link between the living community and beings larger than life, whether spiritual, ancestral, or metaphorical. The construction and placement of giants' graves also reflect remarkable integration with the landscape. Many tombs occupy elevated ridges or gentle slopes, with the exedra oriented to dominate the immediate surroundings, overseeing valleys, watercourses, or agricultural terraces. The placement may have served both practical and symbolic functions. The tombs are visible markers within the landscape, but their orientation could also encode cultural memory, cosmological knowledge, or ritual pathways for the living. How much of this intentionality is still legible to us, and how much has been obscured by time, weathering, and human alteration of the landscape? Visiting these sites today, one is struck by their silent power. The wind brushes across the stone surfaces, carrying the faint scent of earth and vegetation, while sunlight illuminates the exedra, casting long shadows across the chambers. Standing at the entrance, one feels both small and connected to a distant past. Small, in the shadow of the massive stones. Connected, through the enduring intent of the people who shaped, transported, and arranged them. The tombs speak not only of death, but of communal effort, memory, and belief, yet their full significance remains tantalizingly out of reach. The giants' graves, like the Talayotic Navetas, Uplistsikhe, Zlatosel Dolmen, Namoratunga II, Yeha, Chankillo, Valerón, Pukara de Quitor, Carn Euny, Zorats Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic sacred wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan occupy a liminal space between human skill, social organization, and enduring mystery. They demonstrate technical mastery, communal planning, and symbolic intent, yet the full scope of their purpose, meaning, and the knowledge embedded within them remains unresolved. Were they primarily tombs, ceremonial centers, territorial markers, or a synthesis of all these functions? Did their creators encode knowledge of celestial cycles, social hierarchy, or ritual practice that modern scholarship has only begun to glimpse? As the sun dips behind Sardinia's hills, casting long shadows over the massive stones and illuminating the exedra in warm, golden light, the giants' graves stand as monuments to human imagination, ambition, and reverence. They are both architectural and symbolic, practical and ceremonial, silent yet eloquent. And in that quiet endurance, one is confronted with the same enduring question that threads through every extraordinary site we have explored. How much of our ancestors' understanding of life, death, landscape, and cosmos is still etched in stone, waiting to be seen, interpreted, or perhaps forever hidden in the shadowed chambers of the past? From the giants' graves of Sardinia, where monumental stones curve across the landscape and mark centuries of communal memory, our exploration now turns south across the African continent, into the rolling plains and granitic hills of modern-day Zimbabwe. Here, perched atop rocky outcrops and rising dramatically from the surrounding savanna, lies the hill complex of Great Zimbabwe, the earliest phase of a city that would come to symbolize power, wealth, and architectural ingenuity in southern Africa. Unlike the intimate tombs of Sardinia or the organized navetas of the Balearics, Great Zimbabwe is both vast and intricate, a settlement carved from stone and imagination, its walls and terraces speaking to a society capable of extraordinary planning, labor coordination, and artistic expression. Approaching the hill complex, one is immediately struck by its imposing presence. Granite boulders rise naturally from the earth, yet they have been reshaped, augmented, and framed by human hands. Massive walls snake across the hilltop, curving around outcrops, creating terraces and enclosures that both integrate with and dominate the natural landscape. The walls themselves are constructed without mortar, a technique of dry stone masonry that relies on precision and weight to maintain stability. Stones, some weighing several tons, are carefully fitted together, forming structures that have endured for centuries of sun, wind, and rain. The walls undulate like a river frozen in stone, their sheer bulk commanding the viewer's attention and evoking questions about the skill, intent, and organization required to construct them. Archaeological evidence suggests that the hill complex represents the earliest phase of Great Zimbabwe, dating from approximately the 11th to 13th centuries CE. It served as both a residential and ceremonial center for an emerging elite, overseeing trade routes that extended to the Indian Ocean and beyond. Excavations have revealed living spaces, storage areas, and platforms that likely supported ritual activity. Yet the purpose of certain walls and terraces, their precise layout, and the logic behind the selection of specific rock formations remain matters of debate. Were they defensive, symbolic, functional, or some combination thereof? How did the builders decide which natural formations to incorporate and which to reshape? The construction techniques are a testament to sophisticated understanding of geometry, weight distribution, and material. The walls were built without mortar, yet they rise with remarkable stability. Blocks were carefully selected and shaped to interlock with their neighbors, creating a seamless surface that resists collapse. The labor involved would have required meticulous planning, specialized knowledge, and communal cooperation. How were such skills transmitted? Were there master builders whose knowledge was preserved orally, or did the expertise emerge collectively through generations of practice? And what drove the investment of such effort into structures that were not merely functional, but also monumental in their visual and social impact? The hill complex is more than a collection of walls. Terraces and enclosures suggest hierarchical organization, with spaces likely reserved for leaders, religious figures, or ceremonies of political significance. Certain walls enclose platforms and courtyards that may have served as stages for ritual, negotiation, or observation. The integration of natural granite outcrops into the layout reflects both aesthetic sensibility and practical ingenuity, allowing the builders to exploit the strength of the rock while creating complex spaces for human activity. Could the placement of walls, terraces, and enclosures also encode symbolic or cosmological knowledge, aligning with the movement of the sun, stars, or local landscape features? Artifacts recovered from the hill complex, including pottery, tools, and decorative objects, reveal a society with far-reaching trade connections, capable artisanship, and a complex social structure. Yet despite the evidence of daily life and commerce, the underlying rationale for the precise spatial organization remains elusive. Why this arrangement of walls and terraces rather than another? Did the layout represent social hierarchy, spiritual beliefs, or both? And to what extent were these structures intended to communicate power, status, and permanence to both the inhabitants and neighboring communities? Speculative interpretations extend into broader cultural and symbolic territory. Some scholars have proposed that the hill complex served as a ritual center, connecting leaders and community members with ancestral spirits through ceremonial spaces integrated into the architecture. Others suggest astronomical alignment, noting that certain terraces and walls may have been oriented to mark solstices, equinoxes, or lunar events. Could Great Zimbabwe have functioned as a living map of the cosmos, linking human settlement, ritual practice, and the natural environment in a unified vision? And if so, how much of this understanding was encoded deliberately in stone, and how much was emergent from centuries of practical experience and cultural memory? The social implications of the construction are equally compelling. Coordinating the labor required for dry stone walls, terraces, and enclosures implies both authority and organization, yet the details of social hierarchy remain largely reconstructed from indirect evidence. Was construction organized by centralized leadership, or through communal effort guided by shared cultural norms? How did the builders negotiate access to resources, manage labor, and transmit knowledge without written records? The sheer scale of the complex suggests a society with both centralized vision and distributed expertise, a society capable of imposing long-lasting order upon the rugged terrain of the Zimbabwean plateau. Visiting the hill complex today, one is struck by the interplay between stone, hill, and horizon. Light and shadow play across walls and terraces, revealing the rhythm and precision of the masonry. The massive boulders and dry stone walls exude both permanence and intentionality, while the open terraces invite reflection on human scale, ambition, and ingenuity. Walking among the walls, one senses the presence of countless generations, builders, leaders, inhabitants, whose knowledge and beliefs shaped the space in ways that remain partially legible, partially concealed. The site is a dialogue between the living and the past, a stage for both everyday life and extraordinary ritual whose full meaning continues to elude modern interpretation. Great Zimbabwe Hill Complex, like the Giants' Graves, Talayotic Navetas, Uplistsikhe, Zlatosel Dolmen, Namoratunga II, Yeha, Chankillo, Valerón, Pukara de Quitor, Carn, Euny, Zorats, Shimao, Bibracte, Badrulchau, the Dwarfie Stane, Nuragic Sacred Wells, Samshvilde, Grianan of Aileach, and Tel Dan, occupies a space where human skill, ambition, and mystery converge. Its walls testify to technical mastery, social organization, and a culture attuned to its environment. Yet the full purpose, symbolism, and knowledge embedded within remain beyond our complete understanding. Were the terraces and enclosures designed primarily for political authority, ceremonial activity, or a synthesis of both? Did they encode knowledge of the heavens, landscape, or social hierarchy in ways we can no longer fully interpret? And how did the early builders reconcile the physical demands of construction with the symbolic and ritual intentions woven into every wall and terrace? As the African sun sets behind the hills surrounding the complex, casting long shadows across the granite walls and terraces, the hill complex of Great Zimbabwe exudes quiet authority. Its stones speak of labor, vision, and cultural continuity. Yet they remain deliberately opaque, hinting at knowledge and intention that the centuries have kept partially hidden. Standing amid these walls, one feels the same mixture of awe and curiosity that accompanies every extraordinary ancient structure: admiration for human ingenuity, reverence for the endurance of cultural memory, and the lingering question that unites all the sites we have explored: how much of humanity's past, its understanding of architecture, society, and perhaps even the cosmos remains etched in stone, waiting for discovery, or destined to remain an enduring mystery.